my gentle and, of course, very modern apes. Today is the 12th of December. Welcome to SkepTalk. I'm your gentle and, of course, very modern host, Erika Gutsy Gibbon. I talk about evolution, etc. here on YouTube, and I'm here with my co-host today, Grayson. How you doing, dude? What you been up to?
Oh, I've been so good, Erica. I just moved across the country to the beautiful, as you can tell, sunny West Coast. So I'm super, super happy about that. I've got two maps of my location behind me. One of them is significantly more helpful than the other one in letting people know where I moved. So I'll let the audience figure that one out. It can be a fun little challenge.
Yeah, it's just a little bit more specific, but not by much in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. And then on the front with my YouTube channel, Grayson Hawk, since the last time that I was on SkepTalk, which it was a few months ago, I don't remember exactly when, but there's been a bunch of huge stuff from my channel. Like William Lane Craig responded to a debunk that I did of the Kalam cosmological argument. And then I ratioed him on the response, which was like a peak life achievement. Then, I just had a video, Kill It, about the origin of God, tracing his like evolutionary history of this idea of the Abrahamic God over time. I'm going to have Kip Davis on the channel to hopefully talk about that soon. And just uploaded a video today on interviewing two Origin of Life biochemists about their current hypothesis, the amyloid world hypothesis that I've talked to you about before, but two prominent researchers. So like a lot of really awesome stuff on the channel. I just debated Kent Hovind for the final time. I think I told you about it beforehand, and you were like, Grayson, why are you doing this? Stop. And I said, no, Erica, no. This is the final time I debate Kent Hovind. I swear, me sounding like a drug addict. But I told you, for real this time. I told you my strategy going into it was just to burn that bridge and I just wanted to show the world who Kent Hovind really is, expose him for a dangerous cult leader, and call him out to his face, and just make it to where overall he would never want to debate me ever again. And I accomplished that. I mean, I think he lost, according to like the analytics, he lost around 400 subscribers after this debate. And he said during the debate that this will be the last one, and he's not going to debate me again. So it was everything I wanted to be. And I think it's the most popular video on my channel. So people seem to be loving it as well. And Kent Hovind hated it. And that's the most important thing.
Dude, I'm going to flex on you here, Grayson. As much as I love to watch Kent Hovind, get curb stomped verbally in Minecraft, right, by other people, especially given he's like a convicted criminal. As much as I enjoy that, I am a proud single Kent Hovind debater. I debated Kent Hovind one time, and I refused to do it again after that because mostly just, to be perfectly honest, like I wish I could say it was for a noble cause, but I just found it extremely frustrating. I mean, that guy's a professional eel. The dude is as slippery as they come. And, he's not actually interested in having any kind of real conversation. That much is abundantly clear to any and everyone out there. But, rumor has it on the street, and I don't know, you've probably caught wind of this or probably knew about it before I did, but I've heard he might be like retiring from his debate bro arc here online. We'll see if that actually comes to fruition. But
Erica, the advantage you get with debating Kent multiple times is that you learn that, if you try to counter his pseudoscience with science, he's just going to slip away like an eel, dip, dodge, and dive. And it's like playing a game of whack-a-mole. He'll just keep spattering you with pseudoscience and you just keep knocking it down. I wanted to change tact this time because of all that past experience. I knew that the things that really bother Kent are the perception that Dinosaur Adventureland is a cult and being compared to flat earthers. And I just spent the whole debate showing the exact parallels between Dinosaur Adventureland and other cults like Scientologists or flat earthers, and it bothered him so bad and got under his skin. At one point, he compared me to Hitler. He was so perturbed. And at one point, I actually asked him about his retirement plans. I was like, Matt Powell's not going to take it over for you. Your son's not going to take it over for you. He took like $1 million out of your bank account, won't give it back. And because he complained about that to me in private. And then I basically just asked, what are your retirement plans? And you know what he told me, Erika?
What's the plan?
He told me that there is no retirement plan because he is planning for the rapture to occur before he dies. So he's planning to work until the rapture, and that will be his retirement plan.
Wow.
I'm not kidding you.
Wow.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is so incredible. And just friendly reminder, folks, Kent Hovind's political vote counts as much as your political vote. So, this is a wonderful fact about living in a democracy, is that Kent's vote matters just as much as yours does, whether he believes he's going to get raptured before what is he, like 78 or something like that? A million-year-old man
I think he's in his
kicks the bucket.
I think he's in his early 70s. Yeah. And if there is one other thing I could just try to encourage people that might be thinking about calling in tonight. I've been kind of going through this maybe origins arc on my channel. I did the origin of God. I just interviewed about the origin of life. I just put out a video about Yaqub, the Nation of Islam character who's supposed to have invented white people. So I did a video about the actual archaeogenetics of the origins of white people, quote unquote. And so I'm going through this whole origin thing. So if you have anything about, you have some idea about God, you think that maybe we can't explain God with an atheistic worldview, there's something that we can't explain, call in. If you have an idea about the origin of the universe and how it needs God, or the origin of life and how that needs God, it can't be naturalistic, call in. If you have a question about origins, or you think that materialism, naturalism cannot explain something about the origins of the things around us, call in. Let's talk origins today, right?
Dude, I'm always on board with it for any of that. I'm on board for origins. I'm on board for, challenging evolution. I'm on board for talking about ghosts or Bigfoot or aliens.
Yeah.
Like, there's a ton of drones flying around in New Jersey. Let's talk about why that's not aliens, right? Like, if you are feeling like you've got a query, right, call in. The lines are open. We're ready to hear from any and all of you guys out there. As always, theists get priority, but if you've got like a challenge, even just something like a question that you want answered within the scope of like what Grayson and I study or are familiar with, call in. We're ready to take them.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and Erika, since the last time I think that I was on here, I've gotten a little bit more firsthand experience in this realm of creation evolution, because sometimes I would bring up, how do you explain the order of the fossil record? And the creationists would say, Grayson, you haven't seen this order of the fossil record yourself. You haven't dug up any dinosaurs yourself. Well, creationists, in 2025, okay, so this year, in 2024, Dr. Dino with not Kent Hovind, but Doctor with a K, Dino, and I, we went to Wyoming and found a bunch of dinosaur fossil specimens. And in 2025, I'm going to be going back to Wyoming to join Dr. Dino in digging up some very, very cool dinosaurs that I'm not at liberty to discuss, but it's going to be a big deal. So all the creationists that think that there's no order to the fossil record, or that Noah's flood could explain the fossil record, come at me. Because now I have firsthand experience of like, hey, I've looked for fossils in the Cloverleaf Formation, and I'm about to go dig up some fossils in the Cloverleaf Formation. And I know that, I've seen the type of fossils you can find there. I know you're not finding recent animals there. There is an actual order to this thing, and a flood cannot explain that. So, I sorry to all the young Earth creationists, but the ones that say, Grayson, you got to do it yourself, now I have. So come at me.
Yeah, I'm a really big fan of that particular argument. I've heard that more often recently than I have like over the course of my entire career, if you want to call it that, of doing this gig, right? It's like, there's this intense, almost conspiracistic, I don't know if that's a word, conspiracy brain will use.
Conspiratorial.
Skepticism, that's conspiratorial, sure. Let's use conspiratorial. There's this like conspiratorial bent, right, to how a lot of folks in the general public tend to view conventional and turned around and applied to like anything else, right? So I'm curious, like I want to meet that threshold for folks who might have questions, right? Like if you feel like the geologic column isn't well supported, if you feel like evolution isn't well supported, or origins of life research is totally clueless or whatever, call in. right? On the con side, if you feel like there's a ton of evidence for Bigfoot or aliens or, I don't know, the abominable snowman, it's like winter, right? Santa Claus, call in. Let's have a conversation about it. I'm looking at the poll here that asked the chat, do you believe in the supernatural? And we have like a whole 4% that are saying yes, they do believe in the supernatural, but they won't call. And then there's a 1% of people out there who do feel like the supernatural is supported, who believe in the supernatural. 1% of people out of 233 votes. But it's weird because I don't see those people in the call room. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, if you believe in the supernatural and you're saying you're going to call in, like, where's the call? Hit us up.
Yeah, I want to assuage people's fears, maybe that, all these atheists are just so close-minded. Even if I told them about my rationale behind believing in the supernatural, they just wouldn't believe me. But like, I don't have this video on my channel yet, but back in September, I went to an actual faith healing. Erika, I don't know if I told you about this, but like a traveling revival tent that was going across the country, went through Texas, where I was previously living, and they promised that there were going to be supernatural faith miracles, like medical miracles. Like the paralyzed would walk, the blind would see, that whole deal. And they had a running tally on their website of the number of miracles. And like every single night it was going up. I'm like, okay, well, I'm guaranteed to see something supernatural if I go to this, right? I checked every single night. They're tallying more supernatural miracles. And so I went, and I don't know exactly how to describe to you what I saw, but it was a lot of speaking in tongues, a lot of people passing out, crying, laughing hysterically, a lot of gibberish. I may have gotten carried away, and I may have shouted in tongues too, just kind of having fun with the whole thing. And you know what I didn't see though, Erika? Yeah, I was trying to get that Holy Ghost. I didn't see.
I'm walking the walk. I'm literally talking the talk. Like, why am I not getting healed right now?
And you know what is the craziest thing? One of the staffers, like one of the younger staffers that was maybe like, didn't know that he wasn't supposed to tell me this. He literally said, and I wrote it down on the notes in my phone because I was so shocked when he said this to me. He thought I was a believer. He was telling me all about the experience and what I was about to see. And he literally said word for word, I have it written down. He said, it's all about audience expectations. If no one's expecting a miracle, then God can't move. That's what he said. God can't move if nobody is expecting a miracle. I'm like, bro, like, describe the placebo effect without using those words. Like,
it kind of reminds me too of like the trick where like you're a little kid and you're doing a lemonade stand, and so you gotta kind of prime the jar. You put in $1 into the jar to show that the lemonade is popular enough to buy, and then you get way more customers than like right off the bat than if you start with an empty jar, because people like a proven thing. They like a known entity. They want to know that other people are into this, so that maybe God feels like that. Maybe he's just like, look, if people aren't open to the idea of speaking in tongues by pretending to speak in tongues, then you're not going to feel the spirit. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you have to fake it till you make it. I'm constantly being heard that I'm constantly being told by creationists I debate online that, well, God's not going to show you any evidence for anything supernatural unless you already believe in it. And then you'll get all this evidence once you've already convinced. You already have to have faith in it. And I'm like, so I just have to have no reason at all to believe in something, and then I'll be given evidence? Like, this is totally backwards.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
My point was, sorry, I did not see supernatural miracles, but I went there in an open mind. I went there with an open mind. I wanted to see it. So if anybody's got any stories, we are not closed-minded. I know Erika, she's not closed-minded. We will, we will have an open mind for whatever story or evidence or arguments you want to present us for the supernatural. Because if our souls really are on the line, like, come on. I mean, if you like me, you want to save my soul, right? Like, let's go. Let's get saved, Erika.
For sure. And I've met so many people on, thankfully, I'm not on Twitter anymore. I'm on Blue Sky, getsagiven.bluesky.social. There are far fewer creationists there than there were on Twitter, which I think says something about something, right? But I remember on Twitter, right? Like there were so many people who had it figured out, right? Like these individuals have like debunked all of science. They've figured out the proof they've garnered the proof themselves for UFOs or Bigfoot or ghosts or poltergeist or whatever, and then it's like, dude, I'm all ears. God, I would love it so much if Bigfoot were legit, or ghost for that matter. That shit would be amazing. That would be so fascinating. So if you feel like you've had an experience that you want to kind of dip your toe in with regard to this kind of thing, like discussing it and sort of testing its metal against people who are skeptical, we're here for you.
And
Now, would you
aliens
say,
are a big one for me. I gotta say, like,
dude,
can you imagine how incredible it would be to be part of the human generation of all the human generations to finally figure out what aliens are like? I mean, that's got to be like one of the luckiest generations in history.
please, if you are an alien abductee, call in. I've always wanted to pick the brain of somebody who thinks that they've been abducted by aliens, or who's got this crazy experience, right? Where they see something bizarre in the sky that does stuff that nothing else can do. Please call in. I'm so fascinated by that topic. I'm not an alien believer, but you could make me one. So call in, please. I'm begging you. Speaking of which, we've got a couple of calls that we could go ahead and get started with. How do you feel about that?
Oh, I feel great. I'm happy to talk to the people. Let's go.
Positively? All right, let's do it. So as always, the theist calls do get priority. So if you're an atheist on the line and you want to have a conversation, we have an individual who's an atheist on the line right now. Like, wait, we'll definitely get to you if we at all can. But we're going to start with Sam. Pronouns they them. They are a theist and they want to talk about post-death visitations and a shared death experience on a computer, which I find to be. I want more details on this. Sam, welcome to SkepTalk. How are you doing? And can you hear us?
Yes, I can, and I am doing all right.
Phenomenal. Tell me about this not a near death experience, a post death experience.
So, what I'm thinking about is, and the experience that particularly sticks out to me, I lost someone very close to me a few years ago, and there was, dreams that were very, like, feeling more real than real kind of feeling. And it was an experience of her visiting me and talking to me, and I could, like, very clearly, in my head at least, feel her and hear her. And then the shared death experiences part, that isn't something that I've experienced, but it's something I've been curious about, that I've heard about, is this idea of things like a hospice worker that remotely will, like, they'll get some feeling related to the person, like that they've passed, and then shortly afterwards they get a phone call that the person passed, or they feel like the person is contacting them in some way directly after their death.
Yeah, I think those are super fascinating. I actually have had an experience like that myself, right? Where like I lost a loved one, and then a period of time that was like within the year later, I had this dream, where it's like I felt like they came to me in the dream and were like reassuring me that they were okay and things like that. And at the time, I found it super comforting. But like I look back on it at present, and I try to find things about it that sort of distinguish it as what would effectively be a visitation, as opposed to the sort of easiest explanation, which was I was sad and I was missing these people that I lost, and I had a dream about meeting them again, and I had a dream about something that I wanted very deeply, which is to hear that they were doing okay, wherever they were. And to me, it's like it's very difficult looking back on that experience, on that dream, and what happened in that dream, and what the conversation that I had in that dream, and teasing apart elements that are unexplainable, right? Like it very much feels plausible from the perspective of like, yeah, my brain is kind of comforting itself. And I don't think that that's like less important. You know what I mean? Right? Because I feel like I got a lot out of that. It helped me kind of process the grief and cope with the loss in general, which if that is in fact what it was, just my brain kind of trying to rationalize and process this event that happened, might be the reason why that happens to people so frequently, right? It might actually be a necessary step towards grief, like towards accomplishing your grief and like working through these issues for people in general, which may serve the reason as to why they're so common, because they're important.
Yeah.
They're important for going through the grieving process.
Yeah, as Erika touched on, these are pretty common. I haven't experienced it myself personally, but I know that I don't remember the exact figures right now, but I know Bart Ehrman has talked about, specifically, I've heard it from Bart Ehrman talk about how common these experiences are, typically in dreams, but even outside of dreams, people report having experiences where either they're hearing deceased loved ones, seeing them, or even touching them, or both, or all three. So they are a common experience. And I like what Erika was describing too, that even if you can recognize that these things are being generated by your brain and are maybe not supernatural events, they can still be helpful in the way that we process grief and handle these emotions, so that there is still a benefit to it. And then what you were saying, with like people having these, what are you saying, like post-death experiences, like these shared experiences, right? That was the second point that you were bringing up.
Yeah, like people that will remotely feel like the person that died is contacting them, and like they didn't
Right.
know that they had died yet. They hear directly afterwards, like, oh, it happened at that time, kind of thing.
I don't know what Erika thinks about this, but I have had maybe not the same thing with death, but sometimes, you'll be thinking about your friend and they'll call you on the phone or something like that, where it just seems like almost a game of statistics. Like, how many times do I think about friend X versus how many times does friend X call me? Or you mentioned, I think, specifically a hospice worker thinking about one of their clients. It's like, well, who knows these, who has a better feeling about when somebody's time is coming than a hospice worker who does this professionally? So, like, they're going to be thinking about their clients just going about their day. I mean, I don't think that would be that rare for a hospice worker. So eventually, I think that the experience of them thinking about them and then figuring out that they had passed away around that time, I think that just as a statistical likelihood, just with how many hospice workers there are, how many times they think about their clients, and how often their clients pass away, I think that a lot of that could probably be explained just looking at the statistics.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's very much because it's something I've gone back and forth in my mind about, like with what Erica was talking about just how the brain works and comforting itself. And for me, a lot of the thing that kind of pulls me back a little is, people talk about ideas of an afterlife and everything. And commonly, I'll hear about like the fear of death or what happens after death. And like for me, it never really was about me, like my existence, so much as the idea of getting to see people again. And so my brain does this like push and pull of, logically, I understand, hey, I might have just had a really vivid dream about something I wanted to experience, versus that, like, I try to come up with some reason, like, well, it's still kind of her in a way, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that people don't seem to experience these visitations in any way other than what is overwhelmingly positive, which seems to be what your brain would do if it were trying to sort of comfort itself. You don't tend to get visited by somebody who's like, "Oh my God, hell sucks so much. I'm burning all the time and it's horrible." You tend to be visited by people who are like, "Hey, I want to let you know that I'm okay. Things are doing well. You don't have to worry about me, where I am, or what I'm doing. It's all good." And I think that, that's important too, like what I said earlier, right? Like that helps us in part process what happened, whatever it is that did happen. I find near-death experiences that people tend to report, the ones where it's like, oh, I was floating over my own body, and from that perspective, I was able to see the room number on the outside, which I couldn't see from the inside, and then I reported back on it once I was there, and it's like I couldn't have possibly known that from where I was, and so that proves that I was in fact hovering over my own body. And I found those compelling for a while, but I think that humans are really, really good at two things that relate to this topic, right? We are incredibly social, and we are phenomenal at managing those social relationships. We're so good at that, at managing our social relationships, that we can do it over long distances. We can manage social relationships with people like who aren't even really there, right? Like we form these relationships with fictional stories even, and we feel empathy for fictional characters who aren't even real. You can picture a sad looking dog and feel bad for it, and it's like you just conjured up that entire situation. And then the other thing that we're really good at is recognizing patterns. And oftentimes we recognize patterns without even realizing that we're recognizing patterns. And they can actually end up saving our lives. So the book called The Gift of Fear outlines this really well, where it's like we tend to pick up on these little clues that send shivers down our spine, or make us feel uneasy in certain situations. And then we act on those feelings without even understanding why we feel that way. And it ends up saving us in the long run. You're walking down an alley and you feel like you're being watched, and so you hustle to your car, and it's like that saves you from being mugged or something like that. The psychology behind this is super interesting. It's not like you're picking up on nothing. Your brain is picking up on subtle clues. Maybe you heard something just out of reach, like it felt like somebody was maybe walking behind you, or you saw the reflection of the muzzle of a gun or something on a nearby gutter, and it's like you don't even know that you recognize it, but your brain processes it into a feeling of unease, and then you act on that feeling. And that goes way back to hominins that hear a little rustle in the grass, and it's like, well, it may be nothing, but reacting when it's nothing doesn't hurt you. Not reacting when it's something gets you killed, right? So it's like this tendency to see these patterns, like put two and two together, combined with our sociality, I think a lot of the time causes these near-death experiences, or these post-death experiences, or shared death experiences. In my mind, the way that I sort of understand this to hash out is that it's like we're picking up on a lot of these clues. A hospice worker, who works with a client for a really long time, and they really enjoy this client, they like them, they're close with them, and they pick up on these subtle clues that maybe they're close to death, even if they don't even realize it, right? Like they're less talkative than normal, or they're sweating more than usual, or whatever. And then it's like, oh, I had this weird feeling that maybe this was their last day, and then they ended up dying. And it's like, well, you weren't necessarily seeing into the future. You might have just been picking up on clues without even realizing it. And I think that that's a really important thing that we have to factor into when we're talking about explaining something using Occam's razor, or appealing to something like, this was a near-death experience, this was a shared death experience, this was a post-death experience, and the only way to explain it is with a supernatural explanation that can't be standardized or really investigated. That's my little monologue.
I have two quick things. Well, I don't know if they'll be quick, sorry, but two things to say on that. I think it actually goes, maybe, like, I do think that pattern recognition is a huge part of it, but I think that there's also, and you touched on this, there's an intersection between unconscious and conscious, where you can maybe unconsciously have picked up on something that you didn't even consciously were aware of, that then can come to your conscious attention, and your brain almost tells you a story about how and why that doesn't necessarily have to be based in reality at all. The example that I'll pull from is like the split brain studies that they'll do. So they'll have these patients whose hemispheres have been surgically separated because they were like having seizures or something. And so their right hemisphere and their left hemisphere will be essentially functioning independently almost. And their conscious awareness will be associated with one of the hemispheres, and the other hemisphere can sometimes control like a hand or something. So they'll be like picking out clothes that they want to wear in the morning, and like their other hand will just grab an outfit, and they'll be like, no, I don't want to wear that today. And like the hand will be like trying to put it on them. And like, it's like stuff like that gets really strange. It makes you wonder about the nature of consciousness. But for these patients, sometimes they will show them a cue, like a picture of a hammer, or like the word hammer. And they'll show it in a way that it's in the field of vision that only the hemisphere that's outside of their conscious awareness is seeing it. They can't see it consciously. You ask them, what did we just show you? They said a blank screen. They didn't see anything. But the other hemisphere of their brain saw the word hammer. And so then they'll give them a pencil and a piece of paper, and they'll ask the hand that corresponds to that hemisphere, draw what you saw. And they will draw a picture of a hammer. And then they'll ask them, why did you draw a hammer? And they'll make up a story that they believe. They believe that this is really why they drew a hammer, but they don't understand that the reason why they drew the hammer is because they unconsciously saw the Q hammer. But when you ask them consciously, why did you draw the hammer? They'll say, oh, well, when, I came to the experiment today, I walked past a house that reminded me of a house that I used to work on as a kid, and it reminded me of hammers. Like, they will have an entire narrative that they genuinely think is the truth. But in reality, the experimenters know why they drew a hammer. And I think that this kind of process goes on all the times in our lives, where there's things that sort of cross over from unconscious information to consciously aware, like information we're consciously aware of. And the brain has to create some sort of narrative reason that makes sense to our, subjective experience for why that happened. And I think a lot of these things fall into that category of tricks that your brain plays on you.
I think
sorry.
if you were going to summarize it, right? Like, I feel like if you were going to summarize it, it would be like, okay, these experiences where you feel like you're visited post-death might be the brain attempting to rationalize grief, to process grief, to comfort itself. And these near-death or post-death experiences may be effectively your present self putting two and two together of all of these separate clues that your brain has picked up over the past several days, weeks, months. And it's the only way that your conscious brain can rationalize it, because you weren't sort of noticing every time you were picking up these clues, is, okay, well, maybe it's supernatural, right? You're creating a pattern out of a bunch of smaller clues that you've sort of picked up along the way. And I feel like both of those explanations together make better sense of the data that we have from all of these sort of death and death adjacent experiences, in part because these death and death adjacent experiences don't tend to have like an empirical through line that characterizes all of them, right? They're always very personalized to the individual that's experiencing them, which to me suggests that the brain is probably what's at play here rather than the supernatural. But that's just my opinion.
And sorry, I said I had two things to say, and then I only said one long thing. The second thing, which is much shorter, is, and this is just what I feel like oftentimes I come across with people that want to believe in the supernatural. It's not necessarily that they have all this evidence or whatever, or they know for a fact. They really want to believe that there's more than just the natural world around us. Because oftentimes I feel like, and I don't feel this way, but I see other people sometimes, they're thinking that's it. It's all just the natural world. There's nothing supernatural. And they're almost disappointed or bored by this explanation. And when you explain things about statistics or heuristics or neuroscience, that's boring. And they want to live in a world that's exciting. They want to live in a world that has UFOs and Bigfoot and God and angels, and that, what an exciting world to live in that has all these crazy supernatural things. So they're like inherently biasing themselves even before they've even looked at the world around them or the evidence. They desperately want it to be true because they feel like they'll just be disappointed in reality if it's not. And that is just, I think that's super common. And that's like one of the biggest things that just impedes your ability to decipher the world around you, is like you wanting it to be a certain way before you look.
Yeah, that
What do you make
very
of all
much
that, Tim?
sounds like a lot of what I grew up with, because I went to very conservative schools growing up. I grew up young Earth creationist. I promise I'm not anymore.
Classic.
Uh,
Classic.
but there was always this emphasis on, like, they would talk about God's design and how wonderful it is and stuff, and like really try to portray it as, oh, but if you see it as all just natural, it loses that luster. Essentially, they always portray the parts of God's design as being way more interesting. And uh, thought stopper I had to fight for a long time was a prayer they taught that was like, Lord, I believe, help me overcome my unbelief.
Oh my
Hmm.
god.
I've heard that one.
And yeah, and so it's something that's been very hard to fight against because like I'll fully admit that is a lot of it is there's just that internal desire that was ingrained into me of wanting it to be more, wanting there to be other things, to be an afterlife, etc.
And let me just tell you, Sam, because I come from kind of the opposite background to where I was never raised like in religion, basically. So for me, I never had that, and I never had that idea kind of instilled into me that if the world is just this, then it's somehow lesser than. And just from my perspective, when I look around and I see the world around us, like I can guarantee that I am experiencing no less awe, no less wonder, no less overcome with like the majesty of how beautiful everything in this universe can be than a theist would be. Like there's if anything, I don't know. I can very much appreciate the beauty of the world around us. I don't think it's lessened at all one iota by the fact that there's no God. So, I really do think that this is like a belief that is taught that they want they try to instill this into people that like even if there might be rational reasons not to believe, you don't want to live in a world where there's no God because just can you imagine how depressing that would be and they try to like layer on all these negative emotions to associate with it so that like even if the rationality and the evidence starts to make you lead that way, the negative emotions act like this barrier to keep you from following that rational instinct.
Excuse me. Yeah, I think it's almost condescending to the majesty of nature, right? Like the fact that we end up with so much beauty and complexity in the world around us, and the fact that it's so rigged, right? Like the whole thing is so like duct taped together. Excuse me, from the hiccup. That's a great example, right? Like the fact that humans hiccup at all is actually a very very ancient leftover from the instinct that what extant animals like mud skippers do when they come up out of the water and they sort of do that gasping reflex, right? Like the hiccuping is the way that we try to get our diaphragm to go back into the OG position because we've changed so much morphologically since that state that we have this little vestigial quirk that we get hiccups because our diaphragm won't auto correct itself. We don't have manual control over it anymore. So it's like every aspect of us is duct taped together in this wonderful way that is so coherent and works so well because of the way that natural selection um, functions in the natural world, right? And that's what gives the illusion of complexity, not the illusion of complexity, the illusion of design, right? And you could talk all day about like the puddle analogy, how it's like, oh, water is water in a puddle, right, in a pothole or something like that, is accommodating the hole. The hole isn't accommodating the water. If that makes sense. But yeah, like I remember growing up very similar to how you did, Sam, where it's like, yeah, how could anybody think that the eye is not designed, right? It simply must require a designer. And then it's like, well, the retina is on backwards, right? Or the cornea or the retina can detach, or the cornea is easily scratched and can't repair itself as quickly as other parts of the eye. It's like there are a million different reasons that you can point to that's like, no, this seems like the product of a very long, convoluted process that is in its entirety responsible for the biodiversity that we see today and the structures of the organisms that inhabit it. And there's a beauty and a wonder to that I think people denigrate when they insist that it requires someone, not just a designer, but a designer like us, right? A designer who would do it our way instead of the way that it's managed to sort of seamlessly result in the diversity that we have today. It's really done an excellent job of keeping life up and kicking for the past 4.2 billion years, depending on which study you go with. But I empathize, is what I'm trying to say.
I understand, and I kind of, as I was listening to you two, realized a bit of where some of my position kind of comes from in terms of my background. I mean, I always was an inquisitive kid. I asked a lot of questions, and that made Bible teachers very annoyed. Uh, and so there was always that little bit of questioning things, but I was very steeped in it, and essentially cult-like mentality of, if you go to a public school, they're gonna ridicule you, and you're not gonna have friends, and the outside
Yeah.
world is scary, kind of thing. And
Well,
but
there's a
as I
persecution complex that's so odd, isn't there? Right? Like they act like I remember being showed like propaganda and stuff like that at my creationist middle school. That's like, oh, when you go to a public school or when you go into the real world, you're going to have to defend your faith with the sword of the spirit, because the evolutionists are going to come after you. And then it's like the evolutionists in question are like some dork with glasses who are like, isn't biology amazing? And it's like it's just not that serious.
right,
I'll say that
exactly. Like,
also, this is a common technique that a lot of cults do, like smaller cults as well. They will try to ingrain in their members this us versus them mentality, where them is the entire outside world that's all against the in group of the cult. And it makes you suspicious of the outside world because you and your in group, you're the ones that are leading the correct life with the correct knowledge, worshiping the correct God, and everyone else is fallen. It's a fallen world. And it primes you to be more skeptical of science because science comes from that fallen outside world. It is not to be trusted if it's telling you something that's different than your in group. And this is what cults do. And religions, I don't know who's borrowing from whose playbook. Let's say there's a lot of overlap.
Well, the difference between
yeah,
religion and a cult is a fine line, isn't it? Right? Like if you look at the criteria that we outlined for a cult, right? It's almost like looking at the difference between microevolution and macroevolution, isn't it?
It's a difference of scale.
It's a difference of scale. That's it.
yeah, and it's funny because this wasn't completely foreign to me and my friends in school. Like, we would joke sometimes about being in a cult, which I feel like in retrospect was maybe a coping mechanism for being in a cult.
It's a big red flag.
Uh,
It's a big red flag.
but I meet people from the outside world, and that worldview is completely shattered. Like, wow, everyone's really friendly and is offering to teach me things, and like just really excited about this stuff. And there began this push pull of like, I didn't want to let go of the Christianity, but I knew I couldn't stick with that Christianity. And so I kind of hung around more like liberal Christianity for a long time. And
Yeah, and like
it
I don't know. I've always been extremely friendly towards the sort of more liberal, progressive, science affirming religious folks, just because it's like, we tend to agree on the stuff that matters to me. And then it's like the more fringe stuff, right? You end up having conversations with people, okay, like, why do you believe? And it tends to be like, well, I've got a feeling, or, well, I want to believe, or whatever. And being a huge geek, to me, the second that it takes a step out of what we can investigate using science, I tend to just not care as much. Like there are great debaters out there who can sort of logic their way through, why they're an atheist or an agnostic or whatever. I'm not one of those people, so I tend to just be like, "Yay! I'm glad we both accept science." But at the same time, there are reasons why I hold the position why I hold, right? And it's like things like divine hiddenness and the problem of evil, and all of these pretty big philosophical questions that even when I was sort of a more liberal Christian, sort of itched at the back of my brain and made me uncomfortable the more I thought about them. And matters were made worse when it's like you have those conversations with other people who who do believe, and you find the answers unsatisfactory, and then that tends to sort of kick you down the water slide, as it were.
I think I
yeah,
also have, sorry about that. I just have a different
no worries.
perspective on that about why I'm an atheist because, I was an atheist since I was like a toddler, way before I could have ever thought about something like the problem of evil or divine hiddenness. Like, the reason I think I've been an atheist my whole life is just because I've never had a sufficient reason to believe, whether that's a logical reason or an empirical one with evidence. Like, usually if I'm going to believe something, I need a good reason to do so, right? I mean, I think that's only fair. And my whole life, I've never been provided with a sufficient reason to believe that God or the supernatural exists. So that is also a challenge to anyone listening. Freaking call in if you've got a reason. Like, I'm here, I've got open ears, I'm waiting to hear it. Show us what you got.
Grayson, no, we have almost full lines now. we're good on no more goading the chat.
Okay. Well, then just ignore everything that I said.
No, I kid. Call in if you want to prove God to us. You should do it. But like Sam, I think it's totally cool and fine to read about near-death experiences and post-death experiences and whatever peri-death experiences and be like, this is weird, right? Like, I'm never gonna get up here and be like, oh, you can just write off near-death experiences or UFOs or whatever, Bigfoot, and be like, everybody who thinks they've seen them is a dummy or gullible or whatever, right? Like, the human brain is really, really good at, again, finding patterns and also tricking itself. And we all fall victim to that in different ways, right? So, when people say they see something weird, that's super interesting because, while my first inkling is like, okay, well, there's a rational explanation for it. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about it, right? I mean, you only have to see real Bigfoot once, and I'm just champing at the bit for the first person who finally comes up with a Bigfoot corpse and is like, look, I actually got it this time. So there's no problem with asking these kinds of questions and sort of puzzling through them and bringing them up to other people and saying, like, look, what do you think about this? And just kind of hashing it out. I mean, I think that shows that you're a super inquisitive person.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely what my teachers said growing up. I had a lot of questions, and I definitely got a lot of the God's ways are higher than ours, etc. And that really did always kind of not fit right with me, but at the same time I kind of just learned, well, okay, if I ask these questions, they're just not going to answer. So
I mean, me either, right? And the way that I always rationalize it, it's like, okay, well, God supposedly made humans in His image, and that image, even when I was taught at a young Earth creationist middle school, right? Like, they didn't teach that image was literal, right? It was more like, oh, you're spiritual, you can reason, while the animals can't, stuff like that. And I always kind of thought to myself, okay, well, God's reasons are higher than mine, but like, if I'm made in His image, like, aren't I justified in trying to puzzle through that? Aren't I justified in asking that question? Right? Didn't He know that when He sort of tinkered me together in the little workshop in the clouds, right? And I was always discouraged from asking those types of questions too, which irritated me as a youngster.
oh yeah, very much the same. And it ironically kind of helped in a way in that I eventually, because that inquisitiveness never went away. So the thing I always point to as like starting was I read The Greatest Show on Earth by Richard Dawkins, which
That's a really
I'm
great
not
book.
Yeah, and I always tell people, I'm like, listen, I know what you're thinking when you hear the name Richard Dawkins. It's nothing to do with God existing or anything. It really was something like it was the first time I read through and really thought, oh, I actually kind of understand what evolution is.
Nice.
Well, and you are not the only person in that position, right? Like, evolution education here in the United States, and you're calling from the United States, so it's like you're in the same boat as the rest of us. Unfortunately, it's abysmal. We do not prepare students to understand how evolution works. We barely prepare them to understand the basics of cell biology or levels of ecological systems, ecological communities, right? Let alone what evolution is and how it works. And that's why it's so compelling to some people to hear these arguments from design. Like, well, just look at the trees, right? They're too complex. How could they have emerged on their own? And it's like, tell me you don't know the mechanisms of evolution without telling me you don't know the mechanisms of evolution. So taking that step and being an autodidact and trying to teach this stuff to yourself, since the education system has failed you, has hopefully served you well. And I'm not surprised to hear that it was like mind-blowing to read about evolution for the first time, because I felt the same way. Like, when I was like first leafing through this textbook, this hand-me-down textbook that we got at my middle school, I was like, wait, this makes a lot of sense. Hold on. What's wrong with this? This seems like it really works.
Yeah, it's funny how often I'll run into something and find it like, why wasn't I ever taught about any of this? Like,
Yup.
first of all,
Yeah.
I listen to your videos at work. Basically, everything I know about hominin evolution is from you.
Yes. Who's your favorite hominin? What's your favorite hominin, I should say?
Right now, I was joking with friends. I'm like, I went from having no idea what a Homo naledi is to being emotionally invested in the Homo naledi.
That's awesome. I actually had some students this semester who were like, "Thank you so much for like getting me involved in the messy bitches of paleoanthropology and like the tea that can be spilled about like these kind of esoteric fossil sites that people like to argue about and stake their entire careers on." And it's like, yeah, humans are human. We make everything interesting. And as we move into the past, it's no exception. I mean, it would have been really fun to explain to a member of Homo naledi like how problematic their little body dumping site has become in the present. My opinion, I guess I should say, that it's a body dumping site because it probably is. But don't totally broker that.
Wait, Erika,
Thank
what's
you so
your
much
favorite
for calling,
hominid?
Sam. Oh, everybody knows my favorite hominin. My favorite hominin is Ardipithecus ramidus. I'm a big sucker for anything that is gibbon-esque. And Ardipithecus is like a large gibbon, which I absolutely think is the cool. I would have loved to meet Ardipithecus. I think it would have been the coolest thing in the world. So I love their weird feet. I love their big canines for hominin. I love the fact that they were little, again, applying social categories using sexual dimorphism. I love the fact that they're probably pair bonded. And I love the fact that they're hominins, even though they're probably not ancestral to Australopithecus. Like they're Paranthropus, but earlier. Not the ancestor of Paranthropus, but being like a weird sister group in the way that Paranthropus is, I should specify. So those guys are my favorite. Tim White notwithstanding, not letting anybody touch the fossils, but it's fine. Sam, thank you so much for calling in. We got a bunch of other calls to get to, but I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that if nothing else, you kind of got to air your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, you two definitely gave me a lot of things to think about and read up on and kind of ruminate on for a bit.
Oh, awesome. Perfect. Well, don't hesitate to call back if you think of anything else that you want to chat about next time we're on. You have one of these experiences for yourself where you look into them and you find them compelling, call back and maybe you'll convince us.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for talking with me.
Thanks, my friend. Take care. All right. Grayson, you want to jump right into the next one? We got quite a few theists on the line now, so we might just have to move right on. Okay, next on the list from our theist callers, chronologically is how we're going to go. We got Steve, pronouns he, him, from Nebraska, theist. And Steve says that he's got evidence Noah's flood occurred at a localized level impacted by the Burkle impact crater's mega tsunami 5,000 years ago. And I feel like I remember you having this conversation with Forrest at some juncture, but Forrest isn't a geologist. Neither of us are geologists either, but we all tend to specialize in these weird little esoteric corners of talking about theism and creationism. And I'm not saying you're a creationist, but like subjects surrounding things like the global flood or local flood. So why don't you try us?
Yeah, hi, Erika and Grayson there. Happy holidays, everyone, and thanks for allowing me this opportunity to present this evidence that shows that Noah's flood had occurred from this impact event, meteorite, or actually it was a comet strike 5,000 years ago. Are you familiar with this?
I'm pulling it up right now to see if I am. Okay.
I'm very curious about. So it sounds like some sort of like impact crater in the ocean, the Indian Ocean somewhere. But I'm curious about what makes you say that it is Noah's flood. Are
Okay.
you, do you come from that background? Do you acknowledge the fact that the Noah's flood story is based on earlier Mesopotamian mythologies? Do you acknowledge that fact?
I believe it was an actual local. I don't believe in the global, that it was a global scale. I think it was a continental scale flood. So I don't believe it was universal flood, but I do believe it was an actual local flood where
So
Noah
that
was.
would not be Noah's flood then, right? That would be a flood that inspired the story of Noah's flood. But if it's not a global flood, it's not really Noah's flood, then is it?
Well, the Bible doesn't say that it was a global flood because the Hebrew word eretz for earth does not mean the whole entire globe. It can mean as
Well, with the
continental
people that
area
wrote
of
the
land.
Old Testament, the people that wrote the Old Testament did not believe in a globe, so they would have been flat earthers back then. This was before Eratosthenes.
Right. They didn't even know. They thought Hebrew cosmology had the earth, I think, as a round disc, like shaped like a plate with
Yeah.
a glass dome over it or some such thing, and it wasn't communicated to them. You know, they wouldn't have understood the way that the universe is actually structured because they were
So,
ancient minded
but I'm
people
curious
5,000
though.
years ago.
The question that I asked is, what is it that makes you tie this impact
Okay.
event to
Yeah.
Noah's flood? Where's the connection?
Okay. The connection is so this comet was dated based on sediment deposits. They were carbon dated. So the sediment deposits were carbon dated, and these were in the Chevron dunes formed by this tsunami event. So they know that this is 5,000 years old, and according to the biblical genealogy, this is the time frame of when Noah's flood occurred. So that's how I linked the two events together.
So wait. You accept the veracity of carbon dating, but you also accept the veracity of biblical lineage dating? Like that how do those two things mesh at all?
Well, one's a historic, and one's a radiometric dating, and the other is a historic dating. So that's and they reconcile each other very well. They
But
fit together very well.
the carbon dates go back 50,000 years, and radiometric dating goes back billions of years. So that doesn't seem to reconcile at all with the biblical lineages going back to Adam and Eve just a few thousand years ago. So they don't seem to match.
Well, Adam and Eve were not the first humans. They were the first RNA edited people.
Where does it say that in the Bible? Because you were when I said the global flood, you pulled out the Bible verse in the Hebrew and said, oh, it doesn't say global in the Bible, but now you're talking about, oh, Adam and Eve were the first RNA edited individuals. Pretty sure that's not in the Bible at all. So why are you adding in, you're being extremely literal sometimes and then extremely, reading between the lines in other ways.
Well, I think that the creation story is actually a story of the biblical patriarchs having contact with extraterrestrial beings. That's my take on it.
So that seems like a very unique take, no? I mean, you're reading the Bible and you're developing this take personally? Like, why do you feel like you have the authority to read into it this much, right? Nobody else is reading in extraterrestrials. Is it, like, where are you getting this from?
Have you guys heard of Paul Wallace? He's a Vatican theologian.
I assume that this is somebody else that's reading aliens into it. Okay, so you and a few other people are reading aliens into it, but like, I don't know. I mean, this is very bizarre to me that you accept radiometric dating, and it seems like you are accepting that the Earth is billions of years old, right? You're saying that it was humanity who evolved, if I'm understanding this correctly. You accept evolution. Humanity evolved until extraterrestrial beings, RNA, edited them together to create Homo sapiens with Adam and Eve?
No, to create a millennium longevity phenotypes, and the flood wipes that away from the human gene pool.
And so where are you getting any of that information from? Because I do not know where in the Bible or where radiometric dating or any scientific evidence would show that you just said.
Well, the science can match up with my version of the biblical Genesis tales.
You're saying the science does match up with it?
Yeah, with the old Earth, not with the young Earth creationism, but with the old Earth creationism.
I don't know where any science is showing extraterrestrials editing the RNA of human ancestors to create Homo sapiens. Like that's the claim that I heard you say.
That's not my claim. Homo sapiens go back 300,000 years ago, if I'm, from what I understand from the fossil records and DNA evidence, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. No. So Homo sapiens were around long before Adam and Eve were put into a paradise garden and edited so that they would live to be 1,000 years.
Okay, so it's that editing that I don't understand. So the evidence for that editing is the fact that the Bible says that these people lived for thousands of years. That's where that's the evidence for this RNA editing.
1,000, yeah, 12. Okay. They obviously were genetically modified so they could live a longer time. If the Bible's correct on that.
Steve, okay, so look, I understand why you accept scientific evidence. I accept scientific evidence. I don't understand why you accept biblical evidence. That's one thing that I don't get, that maybe, why do you accept that the Bible is describing things that have any bearing to reality at all? Why should I privilege the Bible over other texts like the Bhagavad Gita?
Well, this crater of this comet hit 5,000 years ago and caused this flood. This is what is in the Bible.
Yeah, but we have other flood myths that predate the Bible, such as the flood of Atrahasis. There's the Mesopotamian, Sumerian floods. There's floods in Central Asia. There's lots of flood myths that predate the Bible. So why should I accept the veracity of the Bible if it's clearly borrowing from previous religious traditions in the region?
Well, the time frame of when Noah's flood happened matches up with when this comet impact.
But it doesn't, though, because all the young Earth creationists tell me, they all tell me that the flood happened 4,400 or 4,200 years ago. This is from 5,000 years, so it's not matching from what I'm seeing.
No, the biblical genealogy has the flood anywhere from 4,500 to 5,000 years ago. There's no exact, you can't put an exact time from biblical genealogies of when this happened.
Well, I'll tell you, I've had a lot of debates with creationists.
Dating also has a margin of error, too. So this could have happened 4,500 years ago, by the way. So that would perfectly match up. Thank you.
Oh, well, I don't know why you're thanking me, but okay. I'm just pointing out the fact that I've had lots of debates with creationists, and none of them ever say it's 5,000 years ago. But I want to hear what Erika has to say on this topic, because we've been going back and forth now for a while.
So, Steve, I in the background here, I kind of just wanted to let you guys go because I was not familiar with this particular impact event, this proposed impact event, I'll say. So in the background, I was looking at some of the literature surrounding it, and it is agreed by most people that there is a crater in the Indian Ocean, the Burkeel or Burkle impact crater. But this impact crater has been pretty extensively investigated, and it seems to be one of those instances, I hate to say it, where it has been sort of hijacked by folks who want to use it for this explanation for a local flood in the Levant, and they've just kind of allowed it to take on a story of its own, right? So the first publication was in 2005. And in this publication, there's a very particular line here that's pretty clear on what they feel is a reasonable expectation for this crater, for the impact of this crater, right? Because the proposition is that this bolide event, this bolide impact, hits the Indian Ocean, and this is what's responsible for things like expansive sand dunes in the south of Madagascar, and other such structures that are, or geologic structures that are found elsewhere, that they're basically tied to this event, which occurred approximately 5,000 years ago. They give a range for it here, but less than 6,000, I think, is a fair way of putting it. They specifically say here, in talking about the impact of this impact event, they say, we also find that a 29-kilometer wide source crater cannot vaporize enough seawater to produce meters of rain, even in a restricted region between 4,750 and 7,250 kilometers from the crater. Thus, we infer that the Berkeel or Berkel crater was produced as a part of a Shoemaker Levy type impact comet. The fragmented comet also produced two other large impact craters, one in the Northwest Pacific and the other in Central Eastern Pacific. Where the rainout from these impact centers overlaps, we see deluge events that are over a week long. The impact also produced devastating tsunamis, winds, and associated social upheaval in impacted areas. We date the event to around 2,807 BC. So in the most severe cases where, in these precise locations where the two impacts from this crater that split up from this asteroid that split up in the atmosphere, in those regions where it overlapped, you could maybe get a week of rain. That's a little bit different than 40 days and 40 nights in the Levant in particular. And in fact, the Levant, which is where Noah's Ark or Noah's flood, as this local story is supposed to have occurred, was not impacted by this particular, by the natural disasters resulting from these impacts. Furthermore, a subsequent paper came out in 2009. I guess I should give you the title of the first one. The first one is Abbott and colleagues from 2005, called Berkel Abyssal Impact Crater. Did this impact produce a global deluge? And then the second one says, Mega tsunami of the world oceans, chevron dune formation, microejecta, and rapid climate change as evidence of recent oceanic bolide impacts. And these guys also are saying, you can tie the southern Madagascar dunes as well as dunes on the coast of the Gulf of Carpentaria to this impact event. But that's not a massive local flood that lasted for 40 days and 40 nights and took a year to subside in the Levant, right? This being a real event is fine. I'm on board with that. I don't mind that. But saying that this is support for the global flood or the local flood, and I understand that you're not in favor of a global flood, but even a local flood, this doesn't map with that. The flooding didn't happen in the Levant. The rains didn't happen in the Levant. And they certainly didn't happen to the extent that a guy would need to take two of every kind of local animal into a boat that's around, slightly smaller than the Titanic to sit in for a year while they waited for the waters to subside, right? So those are some of the issues that I have with this. With this as a response, or as an explanation, I should say, for the Noah's Ark story. But while I was looking this up, I started listening to you guys talk, and I heard you start to talk about RNA editing in Adam and Eve. Can we dig into that a little bit?
That's conjecture. I have nothing to go on that. That's just, I'm not going to waste anybody's time with my speculation and conjecture.
So do you
Well,
do you
I have a
think
question for you, Steve, really quick. Can I ask this quick question? Maybe this can get the ball rolling.
Yeah, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Steve, is it possible to have a local flood be so high that it's covering mountaintops? Is it possible for a local flood to be that high? I don't know if that's even a physical possibility, because assumedly they could have just gone uphill. They didn't have to build a whole ark or anything like that. Like, any local flood would never get high enough to where you couldn't just go up a mountain.
It wasn't a 5-mile flood that covered Mount Everest. It only had to cover the highest mountain known to Noah, which would have been in the southern Ararat mountain range, which is probably about a mile high. So it only had to cover the subcontinental and
Yeah,
this comment was
a
just
local
part of
flood
it.
that's a mile
This was
high,
just
though,
the
Steve.
start
Like,
of it,
listen
guys.
to the
This
words.
was the start of the
Sorry.
flood. It wasn't the whole event. There were other jet-sized comets blasted into the earth.
Yeah, just a
So-
mile-high local flood just does not compute. That sentence, those words together don't fit.
So can I add to this,
Well, that's
Steve?
at the most. It could have been
from
a half a mile deep flood. It
So
wasn't.
let me add to this from a conventionally scientific perspective, right?
Mountain in the world.
So
It covered the highest mountain known to Noah.
we've had mega floods before, right? Like the Scablands are responsible, or what caused the Scablands was effectively like an iceberg dam, if you will, breaking open and then flooding the Scablands, the Washington Scablands, I believe they're in Washington. So like we have the diagnostic criteria for what a mega flood looks like. We know the type of scouring that happens. We know what type of marks in the earth that a mega flood, even a local mega flood, right, leaves behind. And we don't see this in the Levant, right? Like people haven't looked in the Mediterranean or the Levant or North Africa and found evidence of this local mega flood that could have been responsible again for the type of narrative that we see in Genesis, right? Now, like if you wanted to sit here and say, okay, I think there was a local flood. I think it was a pretty big flood, but we're not talking about big floods on the scale of mega floods. We're talking about a pretty bad flood that we might be seeing, as the result of climate change today. Like we see some pretty bad flooding, like in Asheville recently. It's like you want to propose that something like that happened and that one guy took a couple of his animals and his close friends onto a little boat and then they hung out on that thing for like 2 weeks. And then that eventually got exaggerated into the Noah's Ark story of Genesis 6 onward. Then I would sit here and say, yeah, sure, I believe that. Like I would believe absolutely that there was a local flood event that inspired the Epic of Gilgamesh, and then that went on to inspire the Hebrews with Genesis and every other flood story that's sort of derivative of that. Because people live near rivers and rivers flood all the time, and floods are really, really scary when you live by a river. And it's the Bronze Age or around that time period, right? Like that can be pretty spooky. So like I would buy that, but this impact crater isn't going to do it for you. It's not going to reach the Levant. It's not going to, cover even a half a mile high in Madagascar, right? Let alone thousands of miles north and, hundreds of miles inland. It's just not going to do that. If
Well,
you want
the beginning of the. I think this event just was the beginning of it. I think there were other. I think the Earth was bombarded with from the asteroid belt, bombarded with millions of jet-sized asteroids.
Where's the evidence
for that?
No
yeah, where are the craters for those asteroids, though?
Steve,
I'm not wasting any more time with my personal speculation on this. I'm sorry, guys.
Well, see, Steve, no, this is the issue, though, Steve, is that your reason for the speculation is just some stuff you read in the Bible, and you're trying to find the evidence to shoehorn into these biblical stories when you're ignoring the entire cultural development of these stories from predecessors that you can go read. you could go and read the Epic of Gilgamesh. You can read the Enuma Elish. You could see where these stories get their origins from in previous cultures that existed beforehand. And Erika just went through the fact that you wanted to pin all this down onto this real event. And you say, look, here's actual scientific empirical evidence supporting these stories. But then when Erika analyzed it and showed that, hey, the Levant would not even be covered in water from this. It would be more on the coastal areas on the Indian Ocean. And then we talked about, by the way, there's a mountain in Lebanon between Mount Ararat and Israel that's over 10,000 feet. So it doesn't align with the story. At this point in time, isn't the most reasonable thing to do to look at the evidence, look at the story, and toss aside the story in weight of the evidence in front of you that we've been discussing? Isn't that reasonable?
Yeah, that would be a reasonable thing to do. Sure.
Okay,
So
I'll.
yeah, I think you got your work cut out for you here, Steve, right? Like I think that if you're looking for support for this local flood that's described in Genesis 6, right? You've got a description of that flood. That flood should leave characteristic marks, and we know what those characteristic marks should look like because we have had other extremely large local floods in the history of Earth over the past 4.5 billion years. So, like, you know what to look for. If you can't find support for that event having happened, then Grayson's right. That's the point when you go, okay, well, there's a piece missing here, right? Like something's not adding up, and it's probably not the geology. It's probably the interpretation of the text, or the text itself might be an exaggeration of earlier human experiences, because humans tend to do that. We do it all the time because it's exciting and it's fun. So I think you really need to tighten the science from your perspective if you're going to try to argue that science supports this narrative. And the Burkle impact isn't going to do it for you. So, maybe you take some time and you look into it a little bit more. I only read the abstracts of these two papers while I was sitting here, so maybe I'm missing something. Go read them for yourself, come back, correct me, tell me what I've gotten wrong.
Okay.
But at present, it doesn't look like they support what you're saying they support.
Well, I appreciate your expertise. Thank you. I appreciate your opinion.
And if I could, before you go, there is a study that summarizes the actual geology of what a real mega flood sedimentation looks like. Like when an actual enormous mega flood happens, what do the sediment layers look like? What does the geology look like? And there's a great literature review that summarizes this called Freshwater Mega Flood Sedimentation. What can we learn about generic processes by Paul A. Carling, and that's published in Earth Science Reviews. So it's from 2013. So check that out. You can see the actual geology of here's what a universally accepted example of an actual enormous mega flood looks like geologically. And then you can go and see if that same geology is present in the Levant area and the Middle East. And you can compare the actual geology there.
Oh yeah, thanks for the reference.
Nothing wrong, Steve, with
really
having
helpful.
an expectation. Yeah, of course. There's nothing wrong with saying okay, this is if my hypothesis is correct, this is what I expect to see, right? And then you can go see if you find that evidence, right? Like that's different from taking evidence that already exists and trying to shoehorn it into something that it won't work for, right? So go forth, see, read what Grayson and I have suggested. If you feel like it, let us know where you feel we've gone wrong and call back next time. So thank you for your time.
Hey, you guys have a happy new year. I appreciate your guys' feedback.
Of course. Thanks, Steve. Take care.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, that's
you know what I found very interesting about that? I was about to say, what I found very interesting about that one, Erika, was that he was very readily accepting of the fact that the people that wrote the Old Testament were flat earthers, that they did not know that the earth was a globe. And he seemed to accept that and showed the actual words in the Bible that showed, they described it as a circle, a flat disc or whatever. And he seemed readily accepting of that information. So then why wouldn't it just be easy to accept that, hey, they didn't understand about things like genetics or geology or any of that stuff back then. So they had this story about Noah's flood. And if you can accept the fact that the earth's not flat, you should be able to accept the fact that Noah's flood didn't happen either. And he's almost there because he's trying to say, it wasn't a global flood. It was more local and it could have had naturalistic causes with craters. It's he's almost there. It's just at a certain point, you just have to let go of the story that you want to hold on to so dearly.
Yeah. And I mean, there are progressive Christians out there and Jewish people out there and Muslims out there who believe that this Noah's flood story was based on something legit, but they'll be it was some local city flood that got blown out of proportion to make a narrative point. And again, at that point, we're talking about a difference in okay, you believe in, a supernatural entity and I am not convinced of this, right? And we can have that conversation, but we're not arguing about the science anymore. I was going to say, I thought it was really interesting that Steve was down to he was like down to be like, okay, yeah, like I'm gonna look into those. He was like, shit, maybe I hadn't thought of those criticisms before. Thanks for the criticisms. I'll look into it. And then he like went on his merry way, which I really don't think that you can ask more than that out of people. Like when you're confronted with new data, like it's not like you can look it up on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, he was reasonable and open-minded, so you couldn't ask for anything more. And yeah, you just said that you couldn't look up information on the spot. But Erika, I just have to say that's what you just did, and you fucking killed it just there. Like I wasn't familiar with all the details here, and then you finding those papers showing the actual projected results of this impact and how it wouldn't at all cause a flood in the Levant. That was awesome. I'm happy to you're a great co-host, Eric. I just want to shout out Erika, give her some love in the chat.
Listen, man, I'm a veteran when it comes to looking stuff up on the fly because I like to argue with everybody in my life about everything. So it's like, well, let's see what the literature says about this.
Let me just say one more thing about the flood, and then we can move on to the next caller. But I just think it's so interesting, right? How all of the cultures on Earth that live in floodplains have flood myths. And none of the cultures that don't live in floodplains have flood myths. Isn't that just so funny and weird? And what a strange coincidence.
Yeah, it's so weird how that happens, right? And then it's like, oh, you can actually draw all these comparisons between individual people groups that live in lush areas like rainforests and things of that nature tend to have like a primordial goddess because it's like, okay, well the whole area around them is super fertile and it seems like life-giving, and like which of the two sexes that they were familiar with then like gave life to, usually it was the woman. And so it's like, okay, well they've got like a goddess that's in charge. And then it's like, okay, well you move over to the desert and it's like the storm god is masculine and warfaring and like all of these like classic archetypes. Like it's not like humans are unpredictable, right? Like we do unpredictable things, and when we do that, it's interesting. But like you can make generalizations about the kinds of stuff that we come up with, right? Like lots of people groups come up with a trickster god, and lots of people groups come up with the sun god, and lots of people groups come up with this, that, or the other thing, because we see patterns, right? And we try to make sense of the world around us using these dots that we connect. It's just sometimes those dots can't be connected, So that's what, if I may, that's what science is here for. Pushes up glasses, feeling euphoric in this moment. So we have another theist caller, and I'm so sorry, our atheist caller has been waiting on the line for so long. But we do give theist priority on this channel, so and on the show. So please, Marcia, wait. I do want to get to this call. I think I'm interested in what you have to say about this topic. But first, we're going to hit Gary. Pronouns he, him, from Pennsylvania. And this is the call we've been looking for, Grayson. Gary has a way to detect the supernatural. So, Gary, you are on SkepTalk. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Thanks for having me on. You guys are great. And to the atheist that's holding on the line, they're a gem to have a theist get the preeminence.
They're being cool. They're being cool and waiting. Yeah. Gary, I'm championing at the bit to hear this. Tell me about your way to detect the supernatural.
Yeah, really quick. As a theist, I do have a theory that perhaps you guys haven't heard of, that there was actually a flood of the solar system that accounts for water on Mars and other planets. So I'm not sure if you guys ever heard of that solar flood, and also the fact that there was a canopy where the fountains of the Great Deep were broken up, where there was actually hot lava, and the four seasons were then formed, and so that's why we have like cities under ice in the Antarctic and stuff like that. Not sure.
Gary, we gotta slow down. We gotta slow down here because you are dropping so much. Yeah.
I want to hear about all this. I'm interested.
Yeah, I got to unpack this one step at a time, though, because the last guy was calling us saying that Noah's flood was actually a local flood, not a global flood. Now, I feel like I'm getting whiplash because you're saying it wasn't a global flood. It was a solar system-wide flood. What am I picturing? Am I picturing like a literal like sphere of water, like encompassing the sun and planets? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, it obviously wouldn't damage the sun, given its massive red giant status. But there was a.
It's not a red. Okay, never mind, sorry.
What's that?
It was neither here nor
Hey,
there.
Gary,
Sorry, I was just being a pedant. That the sun is not a red giant. That's all I was. Sorry. I'm trying
Okay.
to
Gary,
keep up. I won't say anything. Like,
I'm having a little trouble hearing you too. Are you like a little bit muffled? Maybe is there a way that you could, if you're on speaker,
Yeah, let
maybe
me
pull
take it
yourself
off.
off
I got a
speaker?
Bluetooth. Let me take it off.
Yeah, that might help.
Is this
Just
better now?
it's not necessarily the volume; it's more just the clarity. Say again.
Is it better now?
Oh, that's much better. Okay, yeah. So gosh, I want to hear all of this. I want to hear how we detect the supernatural. I want to hear about
Okay.
this, solar system scale flood.
Yeah.
What do
Let's
you
start with
feel
the
most comfortable
detecting the
starting with?
supernatural, if you
Yeah, let's
wish.
start with that. Okay, sure.
Yeah, we cannot detect the supernatural if we're using science, because science is a natural entity used by humans. So there's a spirit realm and then there's a human realm, but the spirit realm will never communicate to the human realm except for some very minor activity. So based on the theist perspective, all supernatural activity ended when the Bible prophecy was sealed up. So Revelation 22 says, if anyone adds to the words of the prophecy of the book, the plagues will be written therein. So after Christ in the New Testament era and the Bible ceased, all miracles externally that we can see, typically that we would have seen in the Old Testament and New Testament areas, ceased to exist. So now you'll hear of people making statements of things, but for the most part, you're on a very, very small scale, like a cup falling down, or perhaps like your hair raising up and stuff. But as far as breaking the supernatural in a strong sense, no. We do believe that Satan can break the supernatural, but not in a very mighty way. It's a very, very, very minor way to people who are really focused on it and are really, how do I say, ensnared by it. So most folks like you, intelligent folks, who don't pay it any mind, it's not amplified, if that makes sense.
So, okay, but if you're detecting it, if you're perceiving it, right? Like, why wouldn't we be able to measure it using some kind of natural means? Like, what about these supernatural events makes it impervious to measurement?
like
It's a
Gary,
wrong
I'll just
tool.
give
So,
you a quick example, really quick. If I had supernatural abilities, like I had supernatural powers, like magic, every time I clap my hands, a sandwich appears right in front of me. That's a supernatural power. That's a miracle. I made matter from nothing, and you could demonstrate that empirically. I could just clap my hands and show you. So we could scientifically verify that I have supernatural, magical sandwich powers. So I don't see why inherently there's something intrinsic about supernatural phenomenon that just is not detectable by scientific means, because I
Well,
can come up with lots of
and
examples to the other way.
Gary said too, what like an example of something small might be like a cup falling down. So it's like, but if you could look at that, observe that consistently, like if you have somebody not like Grayson and I, somebody who's tapped into it, right? Who can perform this miracle, even as small as making the cup fall down over and over again, we could like pull out a pen and paper and start observing that phenomenon. And then we could start knocking out known explanations that there's we're in a room with no windows open, so it couldn't have been the wind, and we've got a seismic reading on the ground, so we know that there's not these minor earthquakes knocking the cup over. We could start like investigating it using our senses and using our sensors. So it's like, what about that in particular would then be supernatural and outside of the realm of measurement and observation?
so there's something called invisible forces. So, for example, we're able to measure magnetism. We're able to measure
Okay.
certain forces because we have the proper tools for it. However, there is something called extraterrestrial, celestial, and terrestrial. And so in order to detect the supernatural, you need supernatural tools. So what we're trying to do is cross barriers here. And so in the Christian
Wait,
faith,
Gary,
this is
hold on,
why.
though. I gotta stop you there because what you just said immediately pulled us back into the natural, right? Because if there's this unknown force, the celestial, let's take that one for example, right? If the celestial is a force that we can't see, something like radiation, right? Like we can't see with our eyes radiation. We have to use specialized tools to detect radiation, something like a Geiger counter. Then there should be a Geiger counter for the celestial force. And if that Geiger counter exists for the celestial force, then it is no longer a supernatural outside of the realm of the natural phenomena. It becomes a natural phenomenon, because part of something being natural is being observable, and being measurable in some way. Even if we can't perceive it with our natural senses, we can invent something that then can detect it. Radiation isn't supernatural just because we need a special tool to observe it. You see what I mean?
Understood. And this is the premise where the Christian faith has something called the Bible. The Bible is actually designed for you not to see God, but has a faith-based system that you would read these passages and believe without the evidence of physical presence. So faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So in order to detect
But Gary,
things,
you said you had a tool for us that you said you had a way to detect the supernatural, and you were just getting done with explaining about how you need a supernatural tool to detect the supernatural. So where is what is the supernatural tool? Are you saying the Bible is this supernatural tool, or what is the tool that we can use to detect the supernatural? Because now you're just saying that we just have to accept the Bible on faith without evidence. I don't really see how that's a tool.
Exactly. And here is the reason why most people mock, Christian faith. The Bible is that supernatural tool that has these stories that seem implausible. And so someone looking for physical evidence without the faith, which this ancient book delivers, the person says, well, I'm not interested. And therefore, they can walk away happily, because it almost seems like a foolish mockery that this book is supposed to help you identify the spiritual realm. And so if you read the Bible...
So doesn't that seem like a very foolishly written book then, if it's not accomplishing what it's set out to accomplish? Which, like, if you're saying it's very easy to walk away from this book because it doesn't give you any evidence or reason to believe, so like, kind of seems like not a very effective book if you're trying to spread a religion, right?
So hold on though.
And that's one of the... Yes, go ahead.
I've got to seize on this before I forget. Can't you just take that logic and apply it to any ancient book that has any amount of supernatural phenomena to it? Like, couldn't I point to the Book of the Dead that the Egyptians wrote up and say, well, the way that the Book of the Dead is written is that, it appeals to things like Ammit the Devourer, or, Anubis weighing your heart on the celestial scale against a feather. And it's like, it's built sort of so that anybody in the modern age would look at it and be like, well, that's kind of crazy. A demigod furry jackal creature weighs my heart on a scale against the feather, and then they walk away from it, but it's still a supernatural tool, right? Do you see what my problem is here, where it's like you could just point to any supernatural book that someone finds non-compelling from a naturalistic standpoint and say that's a supernatural tool, and in doing so you make every single supernatural book a supernatural tool that has some truth to it?
Yes, and here's the argument that I would present. We know the Bible is the most printed book. It's affected Western civilization. It's almost like the uplifted religion. We're affected by it with our own society, and I could go into many details, and I think you would agree too. But putting that all aside, the Bible is different because it makes these outlandish claims of being the only God. It has statements about how it looks into the perception of man's filthiness and its iniquity and wickedness. In most books, they always try to give a more, how do I say, an appealing storyline. But you get to see the most visceral nature of human beings. And a lot of people, especially folks who aren't Christian, they can point to that. And so if someone just reads the Bible on face value, it writes its patterns, its whole thing is just, to me, humbly, more unique than any other book. And like the Quran, for example, obviously written after the Bible, tries to mimic its patterns, its writings, but still doesn't come as close in most And most
Well,
people
couldn't
would
you make that
recognize.
argument about the Quran too, Gary? Like, couldn't you say the Quran is also showing aspects of humanity that are loathsome and not heroic, and they're showing us in sort of all of our nakedness, and that it
Yeah.
also has persisted to the modern day and is responsible for shaping much of the Middle East? Like, couldn't you make that same argument and use that to say that the Quran is a supernatural tool?
Yes, and one of the things the Bible tells us about is that people try to mimic truth. So that as someone who's a non-believer, they'll put all this information out there and they'll say, well, why should I believe that when all these other books are out there? Well, based on the Bible
Well, where does it
tells
say
us that
that?
there's going to be many false prophets shall arise. It's in the book
Where
of
does it say that
Gary,
Matthew.
others
I'm
will try to
curious.
mimic truth?
What's that? Repeat.
What part of the
Sorry.
Bible says that others will try to mimic truth?
I can get the reference for you, but it says there are.
Well, is
Satan
it, just
comes
tell
as
me,
an
is it
angel of light.
Older or New Testament?
New Testament, and also
Okay,
in the Old
so you're
Testament
saying
too, the book of
that
Deuteronomy, chapter. Yes, go ahead.
but isn't that the problem? Because that makes my point for me, right? Is if it's in Deuteronomy, then what makes you think that the Christians are correct and not the Jews or not the Muslims, right? Like,
I,
I
I would
I'm
say
just
the
gonna
onus
say,
is
to
not
me,
on us, right? I would say the onus is
no,
not
it's
on us
okay.
to. Yeah, I would say the onus is not on us to try our best to, on our own, find the truth. From my Christian perspective, there's so many different denominations on top of that, and so many different religions. The Christian premise, and I'm not sure if you guys have heard this, is that salvation is a lottery system. So if someone were saved, God would actually find them. It's like the lost sheep of Israel. He goes and he finds these people. He pulls them out through faith. And so it's a bewilderment, and it's also like a
So you just got
mystery in how
lucky
these
in that
people.
you just happened to be born
Yes,
into a family that gave you this Christian worldview when you
no,
were being raised.
no,
And so you were
no,
just
because
lucky.
it's a
You won the
lottery.
lottery.
The salvation based
So,
on the
okay,
Bible
yeah,
in
that's just
Proverbs.
super weird, right? That this all good, morally perfect God decides to dish
Mhm.
out salvation as a lottery system. I mean, come
So
on,
on a
man.
bigger
You really believe
construct,
that?
on
You legitimately
well,
believe that? Like,
so I have to give you the context here. We are between in the Christian model. There's eternity past, present, and then eternity future. There's never been a creation like this where God said, let us make man in our own image. He put to test. God tests himself. He tests individuals. He created a scenario. We failed. So instead of wiping everything out, he did this whole model, I believe, based on the Christian faith. We're being watched by principalities and powers to prove the glory of God. So essentially, God is showing all of his characteristics, his patience, his long suffering, because based on the Christian model, the world is existing as he is continuing his lottery system. So there's people being saved throughout the fabric of time. And so the world's existing in its
So
chaos, its sin, it's good, it's bad. And then when it's time for the world to end, after the last person is saved, which we believe is now, the judgment day process will begin. And that's why there's all the division going on in the world. We're actually in the death throes.
okay, so
We're in a
if
state of
I may,
hell.
Gary, so if I may, right, like a couple of things. First of all, you talk about the Christian model. I always take issue with theist scholars, specifically, I mean, really all theist scholars who claim to have like the model of their faith, because there are a great many interpretations of the Christian faith, and within Buddhism and within Hinduism and within Judaism and Islam and so on and so forth. So it's like I always take issue when
Right.
it's like, well, this is the Christian model. It's like I know quite a few Christians who would disagree with you. But
Of course.
secondarily, like, to me, and I'm just going to speak for myself here, this sounds like you're dressing up the concept of faith or belief and calling it a supernatural tool that is self-evident. And to me, I don't find that to be compelling, right? Like, what I'm hearing is you saying, look, this book, the people that spurn it, that's a test. If you don't let it turn you away, then you're sort of let in on the secret, if you will, on the message. And so, Grace and I, for example, would be like failing that first step, which I don't take personally. But I find that to be an opinion. Like, I kind of just feel like you're saying, like, I find this personally convincing, and here's why. And it's like, that's great, but that's not going to convince people like me and Grayson who are coming at it again from like a pretty methodological standpoint. Now, that being said, there is a part of what you've said today that actually can be investigated methodologically. And I would also argue that calling the Bible a supernatural tool in that sense is a little bit inaccurate, right? Because it's not like a Geiger counter with radiation. It's not consistent. It's not something that everybody who reads the Bible and even agrees that it's true is going to come to your conclusion, right? And therefore it's not a reliable tool, in my opinion. But you have said a couple of things that are within Grayson and I's purview that are something that we can investigate naturalistically or methodologically, so to speak, like the flooding of the solar system. I want to hear what you feel is like provides support for that, if I may ask.
Good question. Well, we see that on Mars, there's ice on Mars, and we know that it has an atmosphere.
Wait.
However,
ice,
it's not a
carbon
habitable
dioxide
atmosphere.
ice. It's not water ice. It's CO2 ice. It's frozen carbon dioxide. Like there is water ice on Mars, obviously, but the ice like on the poles, like on the surface, like, that's like carbon dioxide.
So this solar, I could still be wrong here, but if there were a solar storm, wouldn't it also affect each planet differently based on whatever metrics that particular atmosphere or environment would have? So if it's carbon for Mars, wouldn't it also on Earth, because it has a different construct, wouldn't it also have like an H2O variable to it?
Okay,
The
so
biggest variable would be whether or not. Yeah.
Can I steel man him? Can I steel man him here? Are you saying, Gary, that when you're talking about a solar system-wide flood, what you're actually talking about is a solar storm that triggers global floods like on each individual planet? Is that fair to say?
That's right. So the solar system passed through this solar storm, and then also in the biblical account, the fountains of the great deep were broken up. So not only did it come from the top, it also came from the bottom.
Okay, so that we can actually investigate, right? Because all we have to do to move forward on that question, we don't even have to touch does a solar storm trigger a global flood, like the physics behind that. And we don't have to talk about whether or not there's evidence of a global flood on Venus and Mercury and Pluto, these other like rocky planets or dwarf planets. We can just ask the simple question, was there a global flood on Earth? And was there a global flood on Mars? And the answer to both of those questions is a resounding no. There is no geological support for a global flood on the Earth or a global flood on Mars.
Did you say theological or scientific?
I said geological.
Oh, geological. Okay. Yeah, so again, please let me know if you understand what I'm saying. If you're saying I'm not presenting a compelling argument, I'm never going to, and neither will any Christian do so, because the nature, like you were disagreeing with earlier, there's so many different interpretations of the Bible, but the Bible is not given the private interpretation that's in the Scriptures. And so there is a way to actually harmonize the Bible to have one truth. And it's only happened now, and I know that sounds crazy, but there's a principle called line upon line, precept upon precept. So, for example, you can find the word tree, for example. Did you know that every word in the Bible has spiritual meaning? God says his words are spirit and they are life. So if someone says, what does tree mean in the Bible? I can tell you, if you look at the word tree, it actually means men. You'd be like, well, how does that happen? How did you get that arbitrary answer? Well, you have to look at everywhere in the Bible where the word trees are used. There's a verse that says, the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Or a man was given sight who was blind, and he said, I see men as trees walking. So here and there, you're going to find the Bible actually defines a term to give it a spiritual context. If you look at the word waters, it actually can refer to a large group of people. If you look at the word waters, it could also, in a certain context, represent the judgment or wrath of God. You can look at the
Gary,
word waters, and it could also mean salvation.
Do you think there was,
does that make sense?
Like, it does. I get what you're saying, right? Like you're making the argument that it's like through the lens of the Bible, like either through revelation or study, you can understand what it's saying, and sort of peer behind the veil and understand when it's being allegorical, when things are symbolic of other things, and in turn sort of get the message that way. But with that in mind, I have to ask the question, because you said earlier, you talked about a solar system-wide flood, and then we talked more about that and got to the conclusion that it's like you meant global planet. Do you believe that there was a global flood that happened on Earth or on Mars or on both?
I believe there was a solar storm that contributed to the global flood on Earth, and there's just evidence of it on Mars, but not that there was a global flood on Mars, because Mars doesn't have
Okay.
oceans and a great deep.
Sure, let's just keep it to Earth then. Was the Earth completely covered with water in the past 10,000 years at any point?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Geologically impossible, there is no support for that. So then I have to ask the question, why would God talk about an event that he's saying is historical and then provide zero naturalistic support for it? Because we can look to the natural world. We can look to the archaeological record, for example, and see that there was a city called Jericho, right? That's something that happened in the Bible. That's something that happened in real life. Those two things both exist. Those two things are both true. But then the Bible talks about a global flood if you're interpreting it globally. We just had a caller who doesn't interpret it globally. That's fine. Neither here nor there for this conversation. But the Bible, as you interpret it, talks about a global flood. And then there is no support for the global flood on the earth in any field within science. So a global flood is a little bit bigger of a thing, right, than just a city. So I think it's fair to say that if the Bible is right that the city of Jericho existed, that if the Bible is also right that the global flood happened, we should find some iota of a trace of it, right?
I couldn't, from what I understand, when the fountains of the Great Deep broken up, the geological shift of a uniformed continent, Pangea, broke up. So there was a great earthquake after that, and we know that with the violence of the storm and the flood, I don't think, so here's the thing, if we're looking for physical evidence of a spiritual God, they're just like water and oil. They're not going to, they're not.
No, Gary. We're looking for physical evidence of a physical global flood that you say happened. We're not asking for evidence of a God. We're asking for evidence of this flood, which should absolutely exist if it happened.
Here's the thing. If you're looking for physical evidence of a physical flood, of an all-powerful God who's going to give just a little bit to those who have faith and just enough for those to walk away, maybe it's possible that without that desire of God drawing that individual to actually believe without evidence, this would be a poor adventure to do. So,
but Gary, the example that Erika pointed out to you, the example that Erika pointed out about how there are some things in the Bible which are describing events that we can corroborate with history. Like we have found inscriptions, we have found inscriptions about the house of David from ancient Iron Age sources corroborating some of the names for some of the kings that the Bible describes in its dynasties. So we've corroborated some of the historical evidence that the Bible says in these histories that it gives. So we should be able to, right? If you agree with that, then we should be able to do that for other events like the Exodus or the global flood. So why don't we have evidence for a global flood if it was a physical thing that happened in our physical reality just a couple thousands of years ago?
Because I'm a Christian, I have faith, and so I believe that God is a God that hides himself. That's in the Bible. So if God hides this evidence and someone says, well, I saw David's temple, but I didn't see the flood, so I'm just going to quit here. This whole religion thing is nonsense. Maybe you're going to.
That would be a reasonable conclusion.
Accoutrements. Well, there's accoutrements and gifts that comes with the believer. So if people need evidence in order to believe, that would kind of defeat the model of what faith actually is, right?
But Gary, the analogy here would be like if I came to you and I said to you, I have one ruby in my pocket, and then I also have 6 trillion diamonds in my backpack, right? And then you say, okay, I would like to see the ruby. And then I pull the ruby out of my pocket and I give it to you. And I say, there you go. There's the ruby. And then you say, oh, wow, okay, you were right. Well, can I see the 6 trillion diamonds that are in your backpack? And then I say, no, you can't see that. Or worse, I say, yeah, sure. And then I turn around and I show you the backpack and there's not a single diamond in there, right? Then you're going to think to yourself, well, overall, Erika's pretty dishonest because one ruby weighs a lot less than 6 trillion diamonds, right? That's what we're talking about here when we say David's temple existed, but the global flood did not, right? Like we're talking about a weight of evidence that is so astronomical. The existence of one city or one temple in the Bible, hell, take all of them. The Bible's right on quite a few historical things. Like it talks about historical places that actually existed that then we then find archaeological support for. We're talking about in the global flood an event that would, if it happened, be the biggest event within all of natural history ever, and it's not even close, right? The Permian was enormous. The Permian mass extinction was huge. It took out 96% of all species on the planet, but it also lasted a really, really, really long time, right? In the global flood, we're talking about the almost sterilization on the planet, with the exception of just the denizens of the wooden boat, within a year, right? That left no trace of itself. And yet we've got 5 mass extinctions detailed in wonderful clarity in the rock record, and countless smaller mass extinctions, and hundreds, if not tens of thousands of impact events. We've got localized extinctions, like endemic extinctions. We've got smaller mass extinctions that pockmark the fossil record. We can chart the saturation of oxygen in the atmosphere up and down and up and down. We can look at the oxygen isotopes in ice cores to chart how warm or cool the Earth was at any given time over the past several 100,000 years. Mm-hmm. It's like a beautiful metronome. We can see it again with just breathtaking clarity. And yet you're telling me that even though we can see all of this with and pour through it with a fine-tooth comb and write paper after paper after paper on it and argue about the extinctions of single species within communities due to large-scale events, that we can't find a single trace, not one single line of evidence that supports the biggest mass extinction, the biggest singular event to ever impact Earth's surface, and you're going to tell me that it's unreasonable for me as an individual to look at that and say, yeah, I think that it probably just didn't happen, and not that God is happy showing me Jericho but decides to hide the global flood.
And I think that actually be a wonderful thing, because someone as intelligent as you are, if you're looking for that specific key to say, okay, now I'm going to turn to you, God, because you've given me enough evidence to believe. In the Christian faith, there's a phrase that says, blessed are they that see not and believe. So I'll have 2 models for you. Let's say you got this evidence. You finally got it. There's a Christian model that says, okay, now that you have enough faith, I guess the next step would be, okay, well, how do I connect with this God? And what if I told you, now that you have this evidence, it still doesn't mean you'll be saved? Because in popular Christianity, there's these models where people think they can reach out to God, they can have free will and accept him. But again, earlier I said it's a lottery system. So even if you did get that evidence, and then you said, okay, now that God exists, I want to worship him, God doesn't want our worship. He doesn't even need us. So I could go on and on, but you probably disagree with what I'm saying. I'm just trying to let you know that there's no compelling argument or convincing.
And the reason is because part of Christianity, as I understand it, is that it's like we have a guy that's emphasizing evangelism and spreading the good news a lot. And yet a core part of believing the text as a whole is something that, again, is so massive, so groundbreaking that we should find it in the fabric of every single portion of the geologic column around the world, no exceptions. And yet that part is just missing. But again, he's happy to provide Jericho. He's happy to provide, Bethlehem or whatever. Like those things are fine, right? Like I hear this from you, and what baffles me is that you don't just say, like the guy from earlier, yeah, that's pretty crazy. Maybe I'm misinterpreting the text. Maybe it's not a global flood. Maybe we're talking about a local flood, or maybe we're talking about a story that got exaggerated through time, right? Like you can still be a Christian and deny young Earth creationism or a global flood. That can still happen. So I don't understand why to you, as somebody who, according to the faith, should prioritize, and the fact that you're here means I think that to some degree you do, spreading the good news to other people, that you're okay and in fact complicit in allowing, countless people to be turned off of the faith on the basis of a really, in my opinion, myopic interpretation of Genesis. It doesn't make sense.
Right. And given your massive, extensive experience and knowledge, what I'm saying is, if we try argon potassium dating, or if we try carbon-14 dating, or if we use all the models that modern science has developed, if we're using those tools alone and not faith, there's no way we're going to get conclusive evidence of everything that we are looking for specifically to prove it, especially what you've said, and I intellectually understand what you're saying. It's so obvious, it should be peppered throughout. But in my biblical construct, and forgive me for saying this, I study the Bible so much, I understand that God does things to confound the wise and to catch them in their own craftiness, and reveals it unto babes, like bugs like me, unintelligent, average intelligence, who has eyes of faith. So a baby could be saved, an old man could be saved, not because they accept Christ or because they believe or if they've done some work. God literally draws them and forces them against their will to become a believer.
Okay.
And so someone says, well, that's
Gary,
not logical. Where's the proof?
Gary, can I just explain what this situation looks like to me on the outside? I want to use Erika's analogy that she gave earlier about how she has a backpack with 6 trillion diamonds in it. And it sounds like to me, like Erika says, I have this backpack with 6 trillion diamonds. You cannot look at it if you believe me that I have these $6 trillion, these 6 trillion diamonds. I'm going to sell them and wire the money into your bank account if you accept the fact and believe that I have the 6 trillion diamonds. And you look at it, you weigh the backpack does not weigh like it's full of $6 trillion. You poke it, you do all this stuff to the outside of the backpack. Everything suggests it is not filled with 6 trillion diamonds. And so you ask, well, Erika, why should I believe that this has $6 trillion? And you say, well, because if you do believe, then I will sell it, all of them, and wire you the money, and you'll be a rich man. And then they'll say, well, look, like Erika could say, Grayson, even if I opened up the backpack and I showed you all these diamonds right now, you still wouldn't be rich because they would still be my diamonds. So you still need to believe that I have these diamonds for you to get the rewards. Like, how is this not perfectly analogous to everything that you've been giving us tonight? And I'll tell you, in this analogy, Erika still never gave me a reason why I should believe in the diamonds other than if you already believe in the diamonds, then you'll be rich.
Great analogy. And I'll try to use the same analogy after I just state this thing. One of the big tenets of the Christian faith is that there's the parable of the 4 soils. The seed is scattered. Some go to the wayside. Some are choked by thorns. Some the sun scorches it, but some fall on good ground. Some 30, some 60, some 100. So with your analogy, someone has the backpack. They show you the one diamond. Trillions of diamonds are in the backpack. Based on your model, this would be the explanation of it. Someone preaches. Many don't believe. Someone says, okay, I think you have the trillions of diamonds in your backpack. The person believes that they're there, and the test is most people will be turned away by that because it doesn't make logical sense. But the person who has the diamonds truly has trillions of diamonds that are not visible to the human eye because they're in the backpack, and that person will eventually get to those diamonds. But the average person is thinking these diamonds are visible to the human eye. And so when someone looks in the backpack or perceives that these trillions of diamonds are a particular size, the person didn't have the understanding to recognize that those trillions are actually so small they're in an atomic state. So,
okay, Gary, the point of the analogy is that the backpack is empty, dude. You're being conned. Like, this just like sounds like you're the easiest mark in the goddamn world. Like, oh, I have $6 trillion in this backpack, and they're atomic size. You're like, oh, cool, sign me up, bro. Like, dude, you're even acknowledging the fact that normal, rational people would call this bullshit. You're acknowledging that. You're saying that this only works on people that are extremely gullible. Like, what? Listen to what you're saying.
No,
it kind of sounds, Gary, like it kind of sounds like Grayson's right here. Like, it kind of sounds like the way that you've set God up is genuinely as like a trickster God who's kind of a jerk, who's basically like, I've given you this mind to think. I ask that you reason in your everyday life in order to survive, right? I've given you all of the tools you need to investigate the natural world around you. But in actuality, kind of fuck all of that. What I want you to do is throw all of that to the side, stick with a very singularly myopic interpretation of scripture, call that the truth, And if you don't, then you're kind of just SOL. You're one of the seeds that fell on the rocks, dude. Like, I know that sucks, but
Well,
it
aren't
is
we
what it
SOL
is.
anyway? Think about it this way. Aren't we SOL anyway? Where's the alternative to
No.
your construct? What happens after you die?
Why
what do
would
you
It's
have to
not
sell
all
why would
about
we be
what
other than
happens
the
after you
Christian model?
die.
Yeah, well, I'm
So-
not SOL because I'm
so
here in
this
the
is-
first place. I've already won the lottery, Gary. Like, as you talk about
Yeah.
a lottery system, the fact that I'm here, and we could go through
Yeah.
the fine details of it as well. I'm a person living in a time period with penicillin. I'm a person living in a time period with access to technology. I'm a woman living in a time period where my voice can be heard, right? Like, there's a million different
Really?
things that I hit the lottery on, and the very first of which is being here in the first place. I couldn't be more psyched to be sitting in this chair having this conversation with you, even with all of life's trials. Like, I'm glad to be here. To me, that's already
Well,
the win.
perhaps
The
you
rest
are
is
in the
just
United
gravy.
States, but if you're in Ukraine, if you're in Russia, if you're in China, if you're in Syria, if
For
you're in other
sure.
parts of the world, it's not so hot.
Okay, wait, Gary,
So-
we
For
agree
sure.
that like the real world isn't fair and you can be born into privilege or be born into a terrible situation because the
100%.
real world is kind of like a lottery, but like an all good,
Really?
omnipotent,
There we
omniscient
go. So we
God
have a construct.
would not make a world like that. That world is incompatible with a God with those
Don't you see the
attributes.
pattern?
Like,
Don't you see the pattern of we
Grayson,
cannot choose our parents,
the
we
world-
cannot choose our race? Don't you
maybe
think
the
that's a model or
afterlife shouldn't be
something
a
pattern?
lottery. Like, if the
You know,
the
this is
world's
not-
going to be a
I'm not
lottery,
saying
and you
something so
accept that God
wild and
exists, then the
esoteric.
afterlife certainly shouldn't be. The afterlife shouldn't be a lottery. An all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing God would make it so that everybody makes it in the end, to sort of make up for
But
the
you guys
fact
brought
that
up a
some
good
people are
point.
born into
We
constant
do-
suffering.
We do agree, right, but we both do agree that the family that we're given, or I wouldn't say given it from your perspective, but I believe, you know, the families or our race or our certain, you know, things that we find ourselves in, we have no control over. And
Mhm.
we must at least admit that it almost seems like a lottery system of where you're born, and some have fortunate circumstances and some don't. Some are able to rise
Totally.
above and
And
become
it's
successful.
a lottery that we're born in the first place, right? Like that this individual sperm meets this individual egg, and it manages to make it all the way
Yes.
to birth. And there's a
Yes.
million different gate checks that you have to meet before you get to where we are right now having this conversation. But the question
Yes.
is, why does your version of God then turn around and say, yeah, doesn't that lottery system suck? Well, how about round 2? And then also the afterlife is another lottery. Like, why wouldn't it
Oh,
just
but
be, why wouldn't you be a
I forgot to mention.
universalist? Like, why wouldn't you just say
Yeah,
everybody
I
makes
forgot
it?
to mention that there's also a big misnomer that when someone dies, they suffer in hell forever. They simply perish like an animal that we love. So now the blow of the lies of the Christian churches and many, they would say if someone dies, you have to suffer this horrible hell. So now it's a sleep, a perpetual sleep, where when I go to sleep every night, I'm basically dead. Every night I go to
So
sleep,
that doesn't
I die.
sound like we're shit out of
Nobody
luck,
thinks
Gary.
about
That sounds just fine. I
Exactly.
I didn't.
That's the
There were
harmony.
thousands, and there was almost an infinite amount of time before I was alive, and I didn't care about it at all. It didn't bother me in the least because I didn't experience it. So when you said we're SOL, like, no, dude, like, I don't live my current life obsessing about an afterlife that probably isn't even real. Like, I live life
Hold on.
enjoying the life I'm in and trying to help others.
Well, so remember,
Hold on just a
you know,
second.
as intelligent as
we
you
need to
are,
back
you've
this up real
already
quick, Gary.
you've already
If I
knocked
may,
out. Yes,
right?
ma'am. Go ahead.
Grayson's analogy, or not Grayson's analogy, the analogy I'm about to make with relation to what Grayson just said and what relation to your response to it is, this is like you show up to a gymnasium and this guy walks out and he's like, great news, everybody. You all get $100 for free. You don't have to do anything. Everybody gets $100. And you're like, yes, sweet. We all get $100. That's amazing. No one's SOL because everybody's getting $100. Now, in a different situation, everybody shows up to the gymnasium. The guy walks out and he says, great news, everybody. 99 of you get $100 and one of you gets 6 trillion diamonds. now I'm SOL. If I'm not the guy that gets the 6 trillion diamonds, now I actually am SOL in that situation, because the situation that I'm in is so dramatically, so overwhelmingly different from the one where the guy got the 6 trillion diamonds. That's what we're talking about when we say, for those of people out there who would want to live forever, that's what we're talking about when we say you're SOL if you die like every other animal on the planet. But God, for some people, is like, guess what? 6 trillion diamonds. You get to live forever in paradise. It's the context, it's the comparison that makes it SOL, right? Everybody getting $100, that's just life. We're born, we have an opportunity. Some of us are born into privilege, so really it's more like everybody gets somewhere in between $50 and $100.
Right.
But, the situation that you've described is the $100 versus the 6 trillion diamonds, where most people over the course of human history are in fact SOL. But God just kind of picks a couple guys that he's like, you know what? These are the ones that I like. These are the ones that believe that a global flood happened, even though I have completely told them in every aspect of my own natural creation, in accordance with Romans 1:20, that there wasn't a global flood. I will be deceitful in my creation nevertheless, and in order to make it to heaven in part, or in order to sort of be led in on the inner secret and led down the path for the rest of the good stuff of the message, you have to believe that something that there's absolutely zero support for actually happened. And I think that is kind of actually bucks this idea of the problem of evil, because you just create an evil, you just create a demiurge in that sense, right?
I totally get it, but remember, a big part of this construct is you don't have to comply, compel, you don't have to believe. God actually does it all for you, then you become one of these mockeries of the common people. So remember, the Christian model is go ahead, proselytize, baptize, compel, tell people you can be saved, tell people all you have to do is believe and trust. When, as I stated before, there actually is a method of interpretation. Now that we're living in the last days, all of these previous lies are dropping like flies. And so now, and I know you're going to probably say, well, why should we believe you? The point is you won't if you're not elect. And remember, the
Gary, how much longer do we have? How much longer do we have?
From
if this
all
is the
that
last
we see in
days,
the
right?
Bible, from all that we see in the Bible, we're looking at the year 2033. There's mounting biblical evidence of 2033.
Okay,
2030
well,
years after Christ's death. And I wish I had more time, because there's probably 20 time passed. And also we know the exact date, time in Noah's flood. It was the second month, the 17th day, the 600th year of Noah's life. There's actually a biblical calendar of history, Genesis chapter 5 and 11. I could go on, but you guys obviously are so patient, so kind. And like you said, you like your life, the gentleman. You said you like your life. So those who aren't chosen, they're actually not, they're not missing anything. And that's the point. Those who are not chosen by God, they're not crying, they're not shaking their fists. They're happy not living the life that, and remember, if someone dies, they sleep perpetually. It's a perpetual sleep. They don't even know they're dead. So it's really it's really a show. Right now, this is a big mosaic. All the spiritual kingdoms could potentially be watching. We're not 100% sure. So it's all a big display. It's a lot of information. I'd love to talk again, but I don't know if you'd have me. So much.
Gary,
I think we're going to have a little bit more time in the show in 2034, so why don't you call back then, Gary?
I honestly,
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Gary. Call back again. I would really love to dig into this
a
little bit more.
You guys are awesome.
Thanks, Gary. Catch you later.
Look up the solar storm. If you guys think that's like out of the question, just Google it. Everybody, just Google solar storm if it's possible.
Gary, I'm not anti-solar storm. I'm anti-global flood, right? Like, if there's a solar storm that's capable of, like, I haven't even touched that. I haven't even gone into that. I'm more like,
I'd love to talk to you about it next time if I do.
We won't chase our tails. Take care, Gary.
Thank you.
Well, that was very interesting, I gotta say. If for somebody that claims to speak from the Christian perspective so often, there was a lot of new information that no other Christians are aware of that was coming up in there, like a solar system flood and this lottery system for the afterlife. That was a lot of unorthodox doctrine there from the definitely consensus Christian perspective.
Dude, Gary reminds me of like this, like the kind of guy that you might, regularly see down at the liquor store who's like, he's a cool guy. He's got some kind of kooky ideas. He's a nice dude overall, but then you'll be like, hey, go and ring up my White Claws here. And he's like, yeah, hey man, did you hear about that, the chimpanzee gorilla hybrid super soldier breeding program that's going on down at the university in their secret basement? That's pretty crazy. And then I'm like, what makes you think that that's happening? And then he'll be like, oh, trust me, you just have to follow the breadcrumbs and you'll see that they're up to it. And then you're just like, okay, thanks so much. I'll ring up my stuff and I'll get gone. Like, he seems like a good guy, but that's bonkers. Some of that stuff is bonkers.
I just love that he was completely following the analogy with the 6 trillion diamonds in the backpack. He was completely with it and saying that it was analogous to the Christian religion. And it's like, wait, but there aren't any diamonds in the backpack. That's the whole point of the analogy. Like, it was just like, you're acknowledging that this is completely analogous to a very clear con with like just trying to trick somebody with an obvious lie, and you're agreeing that it's perfectly analogous, and then saying, actually, the lie is true, and the 6 trillion diamonds are probably atomic size, so they're invisible. It's like, oh my God, it's like that SpongeBob meme where you're like, yes, 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 and then it's just like, wait, what? At the very end. Yeah.
Yeah, and like, I feel like Gary's not like a dumb guy. Like, I feel like the solution to this kind of problem, and I don't understand why Christians don't do it more often, is just to be like, yeah, there is no evidence for a global flood, so there wasn't one. It's being allegorical, like, it's such an easy fix. You just have to be like, I mean, there are so many people who take that perspective, but instead we have to go down this pathway, and it like shackles them to these bizarre perspectives where it's like, yeah, maybe God is a trickster God, and we can't really have that. So actually what's happening is that everybody's lucky to be alive, but also he has picked some people who are lottery winners, and these are the ones who get to live forever in paradise. And the rest of you and me, Grayson, we die like animals. We die like the animals.
Oh yeah, we're not God's chosen. We're not God's chosen, Erika. We just get infinite sleep, which, by the way, sounds fucking awesome. I want to sleep forever. That sounds nice. But like,
brother,
I just want to.
I love the nap. I love a nap. I'd be down for a nice long haul snoozer at any given moment. Like, to me, sleeping forever doesn't seem like a bad thing. It's actually not dissimilar. I was told one time by a Catholic friend of mine, and she didn't actually know this, but like, so I was one of, like, pretty early on in the procedure's lifespan. I was like an early in vitro success, and so it's like I'm an in vitro baby, and it's like my Catholic friend at the time was like, yeah, and like, they're not really like real people. Like, if you're fertilized by in vitro fertilization, like, you're not really a real person. And I was like, well, if they're not real people, like, what happens? And she was like, well, they're kind of just like the animals, like, they go wherever the animals go. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that kind of sounds amazing to me. I'd love to be chilling with the rest of the critters. So I am in more than one scenario. This is like, if I had a nickel for every time that I was told that I was going where the animals go, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice.
Yeah, it's weird that you've been dehumanized and called equivalent to an animal on multiple occasions. Wow, God. The last point that I wanted to bring up, which was just something that I'm pretty sure I heard Gary say this, where when he was talking about the invisible diamonds and stuff, he said, like, now, like, normal, reasonable people might think that there's no diamonds in the backpack, but, and then he went on, and I'm like, look, if you are ever getting to the point where you're saying, now, normal, reasonable people might think this, but, and then that but is not followed up with empirical evidence that's justifying that counterintuitive conclusion, and it's just, but my faith, red flag. Like, you got to pump the brakes. You got to, like, think hardcore about what you're about to say here, because you're saying a normal, rational person would conclude the opposite of what I'm concluding. And even though I don't have any evidence to conclude what I'm concluding, I have faith in it. It's like, just, do they not hear the words that they say?
Have you seen those memes where it'll be like a post from I'm 14 and this is deep, and the comments will be like, this shit probably slaps if you're stupid. You know, like it'll be like some
Yeah.
phrase or whatever that seems really cool, and it's like, yeah, this shit probably slaps if you're stupid. I don't think that Gary is stupid by any sense, by any stretch of the imagination. I think he, smart guy, but it's like that shit slaps if you're gullible. Like that
Yeah.
God's elect must slap if you're gullible. Honestly, the six
No, he
trillion
literally
that are
said-
actually in the bag and will get wired to your account slaps if you're gullible. That shit seems so cool, but it's like, this isn't a smart versus dumb thing. This is just like a gullible versus skeptical thing, which is why it's such a good thing to be skeptical about everything. Be skeptical about the things me and Grayson say. Go look this stuff up for yourself and see if we're right. That's why we provide sources for the things that we say. But I don't know.
No, Erika, I literally heard
baffled.
what I heard, at least. Maybe I just did not understand what he was saying, but I swear the message that Gary was delivering to us was that the gullible are God's chosen elect people, and the skeptics are the ones that have been not chosen by God. Like that's what I heard.
Yeah. I heard that as well, and I was putting two and two together, and I kept being like, I don't think that's like, that doesn't seem like it tracks to me. But then he kept saying it, and I was like, okay, whatever. But I mean, shit, dude, what can you do? You can only
Have we been keeping that one atheist caller on the line this whole time? Is he still here for us?
Have.
Like, I feel so bad.
They have been patiently waiting, and we're about to get to that, and then we're going to do some super chats. So, all of you guys out there, let's say that you have an interesting opinion or a question for me and Grayson, or you want to know, you want to hear some of our additional cool analogies about like 6 trillion diamonds or whatever. You've got an interesting perspective on that analogy, or you have thoughts on what Gary said or what any of our other callers have said. Please super chat in, because super chats that are over $5 we have to read. We have to go through all of them. So if you've got any pressing questions about, you can ask me what I think animal purgatory will be like, and I'll tell you what I'm anticipating when I get there. And Grayson, maybe depending on if Gary or the Catholics are right, you can ask us what our favorite I don't know, prehistoric animals are, or soda flavors, or beers, or whatever. You can ask whatever you feel like. We've got to answer it. So please consider super chatting in, because every single dollar helps keep the lights on here on this show. So consider it. And with that, we're going to go to our last caller, who's been so patiently waiting. Marcia, pronouns she, her, from North Carolina. She's an atheist. She says, I think I have a way of explaining transgender in a way that could help people that don't understand it to understand it.
Yeah.
Are you there, Marcia?
Real quick. Some people are not able to even consider that there's no God. So that might be a question to ask them. Are you even allowed to think that? And see where that takes you. But anyhow.
Yeah, like, can you conceive of it? Thank you for waiting.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks for waiting.
Okay, so absolutely, no problem. I was listening to the show on the phone. So most of the time the caller calls in and says their nonsense about gender and stuff, and then the host will try to explain that there's anomalies sometimes, like XXY and all these different things. But the caller will receive that as, yeah, but those are sorry, my alarm went off. Those are outsiders. Those are wrong. Those are anomalies. That's not, part of the population. So I was thinking that if you explain it the way I explain it, so what I would say to people that were asking about these issues, I would say in the fetus, right? In the womb, the fetus at around 12 weeks, the chromosomes begin to make the changes to form the genitalia. But what happens if that doesn't happen at 12 weeks? What happens if it doesn't happen until 20 weeks? What happens if it doesn't happen until 30 weeks? Is that resulting human going to be the same as if it had happened at 12 weeks? And then I say, and we know that it's a hormone that's being added, and it must have an amount. I don't know what the amount is, but whatever that amount is, what happens if you get twice as much as that amount, 3 times as much? Or what happens if you get half as much? Is the resulting human going to be the same as if it happened 12 weeks with the right amount? And so then you begin to see it can happen to any of us. Any one of us could be trans. And I think that makes them have to readjust their thinking. What do you think?
So you're kind of coming at it from a perspective of like, okay, instead of starting with like alternative chromosomal arrangements, like Klinefelters or Turners or whatever, where you've got like extra X chromosomes or an extra Y or whatever, you're saying you start with this idea that it's like, you get a fetus and it's going to differentiate at some point, and depending on this genetic setup that it has, it's going to be exposed to different hormones, and it's going to develop a different anatomy and physiology on that basis, and sort of walk them through that step by step to show them that it's more of a gradient than they've previously considered. Is that a proper characterization?
Yes. It's kind of like not all females get their period at 12. Some get it at 13. Some get it at 17, 18. Some get it at 9. We're all different.
So I think that would be a good thing to add to the conversation. It's certainly a route that you could take. I think it's especially important for talking about like the diversity in sex and the difference between sex versus gender, right? But I think you also have to talk about the fact that sex and gender are different things, right? Because there are people who are born with a sort of typical setup, like XX or XY. That's their sex, as a typical male or a typical female, but then they're transgender, right? So their gender is actually not what was assigned to them at birth. So it's like, then you have to, you go down that avenue as well. And I think it's important when you're having this conversation with somebody who's sort of adverse to it, to the idea, you kind of got to put out the feelers individually and see what's going to kind of resonate more with them. You know what I mean? So it's like, for some things, it may be better to take the route that you've described here. For some, it might be better to explain the difference between sex and gender first, or for others still, it might be better to talk about alternative chromosomal setups at the beginning, right? I think it just depends on the person. But I think what you're talking about is certainly like a viable means of talking about intersex people. Have you found success with it?
Yes, that's the reason why I thought I'd share it. And I also don't understand why, when we're explaining the gender, we don't remind them, like, remember women used to have to ride a horse sitting sideways? That's gender. Remember when we didn't want men to wear long hair or earrings? That's gender, not sex. Those obvious the examples that we went through.
So
I don't know.
So Marcia, my thoughts on this are, it's a little bit weird to me that if you're trying to explain like a trans person or a trans experience to somebody, that you would be starting from chromosomes and sex rather than starting with like the brain and how gender is typically generated in the brain or something like that, and like the kinds of influences, nature and nurture, cultural and biological, that all contribute to this gender identity that is generated in your brain. So I would think that you would want to start at the brain. But if you are wanting to...
I thought that didn't happen till later. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, because like when you're trans, that has to do with your gender identity. So like if you didn't have a gender identity, then like it wouldn't matter what your chromosomes are. Like, my point is that
we're talking about two things here, right? Because like Grayson, you're talking about being transgender, and what Marcia was saying earlier was talking about like intersex people.
Intersex. That's exactly what I wanted to clarify.
Well,
yeah.
No,
go ahead,
so this is exactly what I wanted to clarify, Marcia, is like, if you're trying to describe trans people and trying to explain trans people from people that don't know a lot about the topic, I don't know why you would start by explaining intersex. But if you wanted to explain a condition that is very easy for anybody to wrap their head around, this is what I explained to like my mom when she just didn't understand all of the diversity of intersex people. She didn't even know intersex people existed. And I was explaining all this. And what really resonated with her was when I explained androgen insensitivity syndrome, where basically you might be XY in your chromosomes. You might have a Y chromosome, but your actual receptors in your body are incapable of detecting testosterone. So you have a lot of testosterone coursing through your veins, but your body is just biologically incapable of recognizing it. So you develop as a woman, your Y chromosome is there, but it can't do anything. It can't send any signals to your body. So it's like, that's a very clear example of someone that anybody could recognize as a woman, but has XY chromosomes. And that is something that goes along with what you're trying to describe. It's something that's very easily understood by people from a chromosome way. You could describe it in the same way that you're describing what you started with. But instead of just an intersex person, it would be someone whose chromosomes do not match what everyone could acknowledge. Like, you know, like if you saw them, if they had a gender identity of a woman and they had androgen insensitivity syndrome, like, everybody would think that they're a woman. Before anybody discovered DNA or chromosomes and there was a way to test it, like, nobody ever would have doubted. So that's a very easy, clearly understood example that I would think of.
Yeah. So I'm really focusing on when callers call in and you guys give them those examples. And I don't know how to explain it, but I can hear them thinking that's an exception. That's an anomaly.
Right.
That's a wrong, right? So and then the rest of the explanation is at puberty, some other things happen, and your brain is responsible for interpreting all these things that have happened, the things that happened to you in the womb, the things that happened to you at puberty, and your brain is responsible for interpreting it. So that's the way I explain it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good avenue to have in your back pocket, But Marcia, do you know that there's a show here on the Line network as a whole called the Transatlantic Call-In Show, where trans folks are like taking questions exactly like this, or even suggestions exactly like this, you know, where it's like, then they go through like how do they feel they are with regard to efficacy or whatever. And they're even like Dr. Ben, for example, he's like a physician, right? So like he knows these pathways way better than I do. I mean, I study not exactly the pathways for sexual development from conception onward. That's not my specialty, but I know that those guys talk about it. Unfortunately, they have to talk about it a lot. So you should consider giving them a call, because they'd probably be able to give you a better answer than at least I could.
Interestingly, they don't spend a lot of time detailing the exceptions. I find that Forrest is the one that does that often. I really did want to reach Forrest and Dr. Ben, but I missed yesterday. I had to go to work. But that's okay. So I just thought it was a way to make it seem more inclusive, to make it seem like we are all a type of sex, gender thing, and there, but for the grace of God, forgive me, go I. You know, any input of, and I'd love to know what the amount of the hormone is. But in time, my understanding is around 12 weeks, the tissue that forms the genitalia begins to form based on what the chromosomes tell it. But what if it doesn't happen on time? We're humans. Nothing happens on time all the time. We can understand that. If it happens too late,
there's billions of people living across millions of years too. So it's like, you know, of course human variety is extensive. And I think that we're thankfully moving away from trying to categorize. You know, I see this a lot with intersex people, where it's like, you know, oh, well, this is, as you mentioned earlier, Marcia, like, this is the anomaly, you know, this is the problem group or whatever. And so we'll just put them aside as outliers. And it's like, well, that's dumb, because that's part of human variation, right? Like, you have to take everybody into account. They're part of the diversity of our species, you know? So it's like, I think the avenue that you've talked about could be useful. I think it depends on the conversation, because again, some people are going to be receptive to that kind of argument and others won't. But you should call when Forrest is on and see what he thinks about it. I'd be interested to hear his thoughts.
Cool.
So thank you so much for calling, Marcia. I appreciate it.
If I could have one last thing to say. I do think it's good that overall we're getting rid of these boxes that we've been trying to force people to fit in for most of human history. You know, we're kind of getting rid of these ideas of, oh, hey, these boxes were just our own constructs that don't actually map onto reality, and we shouldn't try to force reality to fit in these stupid human boxes. So that's one point. Glad we're making progress on that.
The religious are trying to put us back in the box. So
that is true. That is true. There's a battle of the boxes, but The second point that I wanted to say was just if you're looking for a way to universalize this so that everybody can relate and understand this intuitively from their own experience, I really do think that starting from the brain and starting from the brain generating everybody's sense of gender identity. Like, I identify as a man. I like doing things that make me feel masculine. It gives me the happy chemicals in my brain feeling masculine, and it's like, why is that? That's because my brain is generating a gender identity that it feels good when my surroundings conform to. And everybody or at least the vast majority of people can understand that on some sort of intuitive level, because most people like whenever their surroundings match their own internal models of their own identity that their brain is generating. And I think that people can understand that on an intuitive level. So I would approach it maybe from there.
I was thinking that the gender is things that we, as whatever society we're in, indicate that this is what this gender is going to do and stuff like that. And I was thinking that technically transgender people are transsex, and anyway, maybe I'll be home on a Thursday when Tassis is on. All right, people.
People are saying in the side chat, Marcia, that they would really enjoy seeing, like, you call into the Transatlantic Call-In show specifically because, like, workshopping strategies for, like, how do you talk to people who, you know, aren't friendly to trans people or have prejudice towards intersex people. Like, how do you actually have those conversations? And I think that, you know, especially right now, everything's on the table with, like, how we can move that in a good direction. Things straights are dire. So give them a call, and thank you for calling SkepTalk. We appreciate it.
I'd love to see also groups like HRC include advocacy for atheists the way we atheists advocate for them. But that's another story. Talk to you later.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Marcia. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. All right.
Shoot, what did Marcia say at the end? That groups, that we need more groups advocate. I missed the end, but yeah, I'd be really fascinated to hear that, kind of see like what the folks on the Transatlantic Call-In show think of that as a strategy. Because like I feel like my strategy with most arguments is just like try to bury people in data, you know, which isn't always the best rhetorically as far as strategies go. You know, like some people just turn off when you're like paper, and there are better ways to do it. So
yeah, it's really very difficult because something that I've kind of come to the conclusion with recently is like, this isn't just with transphobes. I feel like it's just conservatives in general are more predisposed to this visceral disgust and allowing their politics to flow downstream from their own senses of what is disgusting and what is normal. And then it's just like, you can present them with all the data in the world. Like I see all the time, like I'll be talking with somebody and I'll show them, well, here's data showing definitively that sex and gender are two different things and have different neural correlates and develop differently over the course of human life. And here's all this data clearly showing this is two different things. And then they'll just say, yeah, but I don't care about any of that because I just think they're icky. And it's just like, there's no logic behind it. There's no evidence. They're not coming to their transphobia based on any reason, evidence of any kind. It's literally just that they have this feeling of, that's gross. And I don't want to see anything gross on my timeline. I don't want to interact with it. It's like the same thing with homophobia. It's like, oh, if I see two guys kiss in a movie I like, I'll just be so grossed out that I'm never going to watch that movie again, and I hate that movie now. And it's just like, it's just being led by your feelings.
Or you see it too with like, you know, decades ago, and even sometimes now, unfortunately, with like interracial relationships too. Like people will be like, oh, you can't have that, you know, and people are, you know, humans are innately xenophobic, and we have these in-groups and out-groups that we like to create. But I think there's an interesting little side pocket, especially to homophobia and transphobia, that I think comes from this idea that it's like, well, if I accept that this type of person can exist, somebody who they don't identify as the sex they were assigned at birth, or they are, sexually attracted to the same sex as they are, I think that there's this fear in the brains of some people that's like, well, if they can be that way, then I could be that way. And I think that scares a lot of people. And so it's a lot easier for them to just be like, well, I don't want to see it. Get it out of my sight. LGBTQ community. They just get freaked out.
There are certain creationists online, Erika, that I will not mention any names, but they like me a little too much and will send me like unsolicited like pictures or videos of them working out and want my feedback on it. And I'm like, I don't know what kind of vibes I'm giving off that you think that I want to see this, but I just don't respond. And like, just the way they talk to me, the way that they make me feel, it's like I know when somebody's attracted to me, right? But like this person, like they've got their diehard creationists, they have a wife, they have a kids. If they were ever to admit this about themselves, it's like I almost think that their whole conception about, oh, the Bible must be 100% true and accurate, the Noah's flood, the 6,000 years, all that has to be true. I almost feel like it's all tied up in like, well, if the Bible is even not true about one thing, then it could be not true about a lot of stuff. And then I've been living a lie, and then my whole life I would have to change, and then my entire self-identity and self-worth and esteem is all wrapped up in this idea of me being a Christian father and family man. And if I throw that away, then who am I? And it's like a whole fucking thing.
I am just picturing that like that dominoes, the guy flicking the little domino as it goes to like the giant domino, and it's like not being a young earth creationist, and then the huge domino is like liking boys. And it's like that.
Yeah.
Believing creationists to being a part of the alphabet mafia pipeline is real, and you need to fear it, creationists. And like that.
Erika, this person has even told me, they're like, yeah, I mean, like, I'm a conservative, a Christian nationalist, but if the Bible was not literally true, then actually I would probably be a leftist, because then it would all make sense if I didn't have a Christian worldview. I'm like, dude, like, it's just like, I don't know, man. It's just such a, like, literally all you can say from that is just like, quote Elf, like, you sit on a throne of lies, sir.
I just, honestly, I can't even respond to what you're saying, because I do have a lot of thoughts, and I think they're best saved for after the show, because I have speculations. I feel like we're talking about the same person. But let's move on to super chats, folks. You can keep super chatting. So if you come up with a question while we're doing these super chats, please don't hesitate to call, or not call in, because those lines are closed, but to message in. We will read them. $5 from SJL. Debating Kent sounds a bit like eating some novel weird food. Sounds disgusting. I'll have to try it. For a very long time here on YouTube, it was a rite of passage that if you were in the defending evolution community, at some point the email from Kent Hovind and Dinosaur Adventureland would come, or usually from, especially later on, Donnie of Standing for Truth would come and say, oh, Kent wants to debate you. And then, as always, it was an enormous waste of time. I've never met a single person who's debated Kent Hovind and thought that it wasn't a waste of time. But being it's a weird novel food, some people like durian, and some people like debating Kent Hovind more than once. Like,
okay, wait. Don't compare Kent to durian, okay? Durians are the kings of fruits, Erika.
This is what I'm talking about, by the way. This is what I'm talking about. You like durian too, so my point is proven.
They might smell awful, but they taste great. And fun fact about durians, the gum Juicy Fruit? Durians are the juicy fruit that it's based on. That is durian flavored gum. Just saying.
No wonder I thought it tasted like ass from the beginning. $5 from Monkey to Typewriter. If no one's expecting a miracle, God can't move. You're saying I can't stunlock your God? You're saying I can stunlock your God with the same move that knocks out effing Tinkerbell? Literally.
Or like, it reminds me of the Invisible Man from the Mystery Team, or what was that movie, The Mystery Men, where it's like, I have the power to turn invisible, but only when no one's looking at me.
Yeah. $5 from Stomp 10. How do I explain that after Noah's flood, the water didn't evaporate? I get the idea, but maybe can you expand on how it's not possible? Okay, how do I explain that after the water didn't evaporate? Oh, so Stomp 10, usually what they think, and I kid you not, this is a classic idea, is they think that the water effectively seeped down into the crust of the earth and became a part of a mineral down there called ringwoodite. You will see that cited a lot from creationists. So they think that the water is still here, and they will also point to very vague papers or news reports that will be like, we just discovered an ocean underneath the ocean, and it'll be like, oh yeah, there's a cavity underneath, parts of the Atlantic Ocean that where it continues down, or the Pacific, or whatever. And they'll point to that to basically say that who knows how much water is actually on the earth, and then they'll sort of stick the Noah's flood waters into that little cavity. And then you've got Walt Brown fans who support the hydroplate hypothesis, which is the most crazy one of all, because Walt Brown will just be like, yep, it required 5,000 trillion tons worth of TNT, of H-bombs to actually, of energy, like H-bombs, 5,000 trillion H-bombs of energy's worth to actually facilitate everything that happened during the flood. That's Walt Brown's actual numbers, not mine. And that's because Walt believes that every single comet that is in the asteroid belt and every single impact crater on every single rocky planet within our solar system was actually from Earth ejecta that was blasted into the outer reaches of space during Noah's flood. So just so you know, the Earth would have had to have been like several hundred times larger just 4,400 years ago to make that possible, and then the size of the Earth wouldn't have allowed for life. It's a crazy, crazy thing. That's what they think. Okay, $5.
I'm telling you, Erika, I really do have 6 trillion diamonds in this backpack. I swear.
Yeah. Literally, Grayson, it's the Simpsons Aurora Borealis meme. Aurora Borealis at this time of day, at this time of year, located entirely within your kitchen. Yes. Can I see it? No. Like 6 trillion diamonds in that backpack. Can I see it? No.
And it's like, instead of the heat problem for the flood, the backpack has the weight problem, and it requires a miracle to evaporate all the extra weight from the 6 trillion diamonds.
But only when you pick it up, selectively when you're holding it. Floop Fleep, Wamana Hamana, IB Baba. Sorry, I don't know what came over me. It's okay, Skeptoidius. That was very similar
speaking
to
in
talking
tongues.
to some of our colleagues.
I know exactly what came over him, the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, that's true. That's actually really true. The reason, but here's the thing though, Gary's right. My mind is closed off. So I actually cannot, I turn away from this because of my wit and skepticism.
You're not gullible enough, Erika, that's why.
Exactly. Hope everyone has a great week. Alan, I'm having a great week so far, but only because of this. We got $5 from Monkey the Typewriter. Man, how jaded do you have to be when you're worried that actual existence won't be able to? I don't understand the appeal of gods. And honestly, I feel very similarly. I see a lot of people who are like, man, I'm really looking forward to not being alive anymore because they're looking forward to what's next. And I'm like, brother.
I just have one thing to say about this. If actual existence is not holding your interest, like, go to therapy. Like, you're probably depressed. Like, it has nothing to do with God or atheism. Like, if actual existence is not amazing enough, like, then I don't know, man. Maybe make a change in your life. Go to therapy. Get medical help, or get some sort of, do something about your depression. Because, like, life can be pretty awesome when you're in the right situation.
And imbalance. Like, and SSRIs would fix that. Just saying. If that's what it is. £5 from Mystic Minds Analysis Tavern. Something to chew on. Why does fantasy have to be real to be valuable? Is a story not good enough unless it's true? We tell stories for a reason. I feel the same way, right? Which is why I think it's so weird that, religious folks in general are so, like, reticent to be like, yep, that story that was in the holy text, it was a story and it was intended to be a story. Like, that saves you so much time and arguments. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, I literally write fantasy novels as like a side hobby. So you're preaching to the choir over here. I love fantasy. I'm like, yeah, fantasy stories can be incredibly valuable and have some amazing impacts on my life and improving my life for having read them. So
We love stories. $5 from Skeptoid is technically every flying object that you're unsure of is a UFO. Not necessarily aliens, but it is UFO. Jimmy, go spend an hour mute with Kent. This is a Jimmy, go fuck yourself little deal at the end there. I agree. And you're right. When I should have said aliens and not UFOs, because there are many, 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 many UFOs that are yet to be sort of investigated and turn out to be like cool things that are like, oh, it's a new government tech, or it's a ball lightning.
I'm leaning towards it's humans from the future traveling back to our time for tourism.
Oh, I'd love that. I hope they're coming to see me because they know I one day will be so powerful. Folks out there, you guys know that I'm quite large. I'm like 7 stories tall. They're coming back to prevent me from my eventual rampage that destroys Washington, D.C. in Roblox. $4.99 from Philip Kelly. Steve, in FF7, Final Fantasy VII, the Cetrae were an ancient civilization that fought off an alien invasion, almost died off, and then became humans. LOL. He don't tell him stuff like that, or he'll be like, wait, maybe.
Actually, I think that there's a passage in the Bible that supports this.
That might be true. It just depends on how you interpret it, right?
Yeah.
We have $5 from Larry Fishman. I'm pretty sure Steve watches Ancient Aliens or some Electric Universe garbage on YouTube. Yeah, probably.
It is a safe
Universe
bet.
Stuff always blows my mind. $5 from Eliashana Silver Bow. Grayson, I'm hungry. Can you make me a sandwich? Kay, thanks, bye. Grayson, can you?
Yes, absolutely. I can make you a sandwich. Just DM me an address and I will get that choppered in on ice.
Well, you're poofing it into existence. That's your power.
Right. I forgot about that bit. In that case, no, you cannot have a sandwich unless you acknowledge me as the one true sandwich god and tithe 10% of your income.
It's a really, really good deal when you think about it, but not too hard, of course.
I mean, yeah, free sandwiches for life. I mean,
the Berkeley impact would have flooded the Iraqi floodplain under about 20 feet of seawater for a few, as described in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Noah's flood is a ripoff and elaboration of the epic.
Yeah.
$5 from One-Eyed Heathen. Hello, Erika and Grayson. I just learned about Gibbon singing duets together, and that's precious. Tell me more about Gibbon noises, please. You better be careful with questions like that, One-Eyed Heathen. Gibbons, they sing duets, and the males and females actually have like different parts to play. So some will have like these long calls, and the long calls will sound sort of like, they'll be like, ooh, like that, ooh, and then the female will come in and be like, and weave it into the call of the male, and it's absolutely stunning to hear because they hype themselves up. You can watch them like work themselves up and get super excited, and at the crescendo of the song, they both like about face and like rustle around, and they're like moving all through the trees because they're like getting lost in the sauce. It's the cutest thing ever. And Siamese are even more elaborate with theirs because they've got those big gular throat pouches, so they'll inflate it. So they do like a woo like that, and then they'll elaborate on the call. It's phenomenal. And they're really complicated calls.
I'm sorry, but I am not equipped to give you a demonstration. I'm sorry. I know that Erika would be down to play the role, but I haven't practiced. I'm not good at my Gibbon sounding yet.
It is something
we
that
could do
I
a Gibbon
practice
duet
daily. I practice it a lot. So like it's very once you get it, it's hard to not do every time like you wake up, because like otherwise interlopers are going to come into your territory and you have to make sure that they don't, especially if you have a spouse.
Okay,
so
wait.
My husband and I
let me do one. I want to do one try at it. Give me the male call one more time. What do the males do?
The male is low and it comes up to a high note, and then the female weave it in. So the males will go like, ooh, ooh, like that, and it ends on that high.
Ooh.
That's
tried.
right if the gibbon were like 500 pounds. Like if the gibbon were very large, that
Oh
would be perfect.
wow! You just didn't call me a
I'm just saying,
500-pound
little guys,
gibbon.
they got the high pitch. Yeah, and it
I
does
tried.
take practice, Grayson. So I do get a lot of practice. My husband and I, we wake up at about 4 a.m. every morning, and we zoom to the top of our house, and we cling to the chimney and do these duets just to make sure that no other gibbons sort of come into our territory.
Wow.
It's very important
And
part of courtship.
They say that romance is dead.
They say romance is dead. They haven't met me. Boy, I know a romance fan hates to see me come in. They see my story and they're like, oh shit, that's the cutest thing ever. $5 from mostly gizzards. Watch out for giraffes. They cannot be trusted.
That's probably a reference. That's probably a reference to me, a famous giraffe hater, and I get a lot of hate online for hating giraffes, but I maintain that you cannot trust a giraffe, okay? Like, I maintain this based on the sum total of my life experiences with giraffes. Not trustable folk. And they don't make a sound because their necks are so long that they can't make a sound. I don't trust that. They sleep the least amount of any mammals. That's not very trustworthy. If you fall asleep in front of a giraffe who is biologically incapable of making a sound and only sleeps like 45 minutes a night, and they have these weird little horns. Why do they have these horns? They don't need these horns, okay? There's just a lot of questionable things about a giraffe. I'm sorry, but yeah, this comment was designed the last comment was designed to get you spun up. This comment was to spin me up.
I didn't know that you had such disdain for giraffes. You feel the same way about okapis?
It wasn't always like
this.
Okay? Erika, it was not always like this. I've had one too many negative experiences with a giraffe in my life. Okay, no, I'm a huge okapi guy. I'm an okapi stan. Okay, I was 3 or 4 years old when I went to the zoo, and my grandpa was like, "Grayson, look, it's a zebra," and I'm like, "Actually, Grandpa, that's an okapi." Okay, I like okapis a lot. If you can't tell.
So I feel like this is sort of one of those things where it's like your hatred of giraffes might come from your loyalty to the okapis, but that's fine.
No, it's my experiences. Sorry.
What is the most interesting book that you've read in the course of your study for your PhD specialty? Also, why are the Cleveland Browns? I don't know about why are the Cleveland Browns. Is that your thing, Grayson?
No, but I just learned about the Cleveland Browns' existence yesterday. My new friends that I moved in with, they had the football game on, and your boy, I do not sport. I don't know anything about sports. I went in them and asked, I asked them which two teams are fighting, and they all started laughing. And I'm like, "Is not the word?" And they're like, "It's playing. Which two teams are playing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know if they were cute little boys that like to play, but okay." And they explained to me that it was the Cleveland Browns. And I judge sport teams based on their mascots. So I was like, oh, well, who are the Cleveland Browns mascots? And they told me they are an impish little Keebler elf man. And that's the worst mascot of all time. It's a little Keebler elf called Brownie the Elf. And I'm like, how do you take this team seriously? How does anybody in the city of Cleveland? I mean, okay, well, never mind. I just answered my question. It's Cleveland. But I don't understand how you could take a little elf guy seriously as a mascot.
I feel like it's one of those things where it's like when you kind of have a bad mascot, you have an opportunity to not have the mascot be what the name is. So my husband's a big, God rest his soul, Maple Leafs fan. So he's angry a lot. And the Maple Leafs... a maple leaf is not a very intimidating mascot. So he told me recently that what they actually have as their mascot is a polar bear that is wearing a Maple Leafs jersey, which makes more sense because a polar bear is intimidating. But then it's then you've got what is it? I think it's Kentucky whatever's in Bowling Green. What's in Bowling Green? Whatever.
I just told you I don't sport.
It's their mascot is the Hilltoppers, and a Hilltopper, they're just it's a big red guy. He's a spinning top. And that's what the mascot is. It's like you had an opportunity,
What?
you know? Like it could have been like a real alpha because he's topping, you know. So it's like the hill toppers. Like they don't put me in charge of these things, and they do that because they know
They
that I would make
should.
them too much money. You're telling me the best.
Wait.
most
You didn't answer the
interesting
question.
book-
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. The most interesting book that I've read over the course of study for my PhD or specialty. You know, that's a hard sell because like it depends on, or a hard question to ask because it depends on the topic. For my particular specialty, there are not very many books written about it because I study Miocene apes. So Miocene apes are a very unpopular period of time within primate evolution in general because there's too many of them and nobody knows what to do with all of them. So I've read pretty much every single book that's about Miocene apes. That's like a pop science book, and then countless articles. So I guess within that frame set, within the framework of what you've given me here, my favorite would probably have to be either An Ape's View of Human Evolution by Peter Andrews or The Real Planet of the Apes by David Begun, which are both really great books about Miocene apes, and they give you a nice little overview of them from different perspectives. So that's what I would say.
I don't have a PhD. I just have a lowly undergrad in biochemistry, but we did have reading materials in that biochemistry course, and one of my biochem professors suggested this book, Good Calories, Bad Calories, which I really liked because it was relevant. I mean, we all eat. So understanding maybe from a more biochemical level of like nutrition, I just found like really cool. It was a good, if you're at all curious about nutrition on a biochemical level, Good Calories, Bad Calories, I found pretty enjoyable and accessible.
$4.99 from Nuzzy D. What are your favorite sci-fi or fantasy pieces of media? Also, Erika's Too Nice Gary was dumb. Oh man. Okay, you go first. I have to think about mine. My favorite fantasy or sci-fi pieces of media.
Okay, so I'll go with fantasy books and sci-fi movies. So fantasy books, I really love A Song of Ice and Fire, George R. R. Martin. I know that everybody's losing their mind about the new Cosmere book. And I really, really love The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, one of my favorite fantasy books and writers. And then sci-fi movies, obviously 2001: A Space Odyssey is one of the best sci-fi movies ever made, but my favorite is Stalker, a Soviet movie from 1979. And Stalker is like, it's a low-budget sci-fi. Half of the production crew died of cancer by making this movie, including the director, because they were filming in like toxic, abandoned factories. And it is just like one of the most incredible pieces of cinema I've ever seen. Every single shot is a visual poem. It's an incredible movie. It's about a writer and a physicist going inside this crazy twilight zone in the middle of rural Russia where just crazy sci-fi stuff happens. It is an insane movie. Highly recommend. Very cerebral film.
So I'm going to do the opposite then. I'll do my favorite sci-fi books and fantasy movies. So favorite fantasy movies, I'm going to be basic. I love The Lord of the Rings. Who doesn't? I really enjoy them. I think they're wonderful. They're a blast. I have fun with them. For sci-fi books, I haven't read a whole lot of sci-fi books. I've read a lot of I'm reading through all of Lovecraft's novels or novellas. I don't really think those are sci-fi though. So I'll just go with the last sci-fi book that I read and enjoyed, which was actually the first book in the Red Rising series. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, those are great books. The author's really, really cool too, if you don't know much about him.
I do not know much about him at all, but I did enjoy it. So, and then I'll give my reverse next time. What do we got next? Next up, we have 5.99 euros from Tergipes. Is there a skull fossil replica model you would like to add to your collection? Yes, there is. There are many, all of them. But the next one on my list, I have a couple. So I actually asked this Christmas for a vervet monkey skull. There are some ethically sourced actual vervet monkey crania that you can get from Skulls Unlimited, and they were selling a really nice male that I thought looked really pretty. And I don't have any real primate skulls at all, for obvious reasons, but vervets are very plentiful, and I believe it came from not a research, but a colony, a research colony. So I thought that would be really cool to have. As far as replicas go, I would absolutely love to have a Paranthropus boisei, because I have Paranthropus back there, but it's got no teeth. And then I have a separate mandible that has some teeth, but it's 3D printed. I would love a cast of Paranthropus boisei. I think that would be absolutely phenomenal. There's also a wonderful Paralopithecus catalonicus face that is, from bone clones, which, bone clones is fine for getting the point across. So bone clones gets a lot of flack in the professional community because they're models, right? Like they're not casts, which casts are always ideal. So, but they get across the point that you're trying to make. So those two would be amazing. And then my non-primate pick, I was reading last night for fun about pinnipeds because I don't know very much about pinnipeds. Now I know a lot more about them. And I remind me to tell you something interesting about walruses here in a minute, Grayson, because I found something about walruses recently and how they sleep, and it might challenge your giraffe claim from earlier, maybe.
Okay.
But I would really, really like to have a leopard seal replica skull, or a crab-eater seal, because their post-canine teeth are homodont. They're weird. They're almost cetacean-like, but they're not homodont and like pegs. They're homodont and like weird. Like if you look up a leopard seal skull, they've got all these weird loafs and stuff on their post-canine teeth, and it's so that they can filter krill. So they can take these big bites out of krill, swarms, and then the krill stays in and everything else filters out. And our crab-eater seals mostly do that. Leopard seals do it too, but they also hunt like big game. But I thought that was super fascinating because when you think about homodonty just means all the teeth look the same. When you think of homodonty in mammals, you only think of cetaceans and their little peg teeth that they have all along their mouths. Like they don't have any specialized teeth like we do, for instance, where we got incisors and canines and premolars and molars. But then it's like these weird seals have like incisors, and then they have another incisor that looks kind of like a canine, and then they've got their canines, and then it's just like, oops, all weird, wavy, cuspy, loby looking teeth for filtering krill. It's awesome. So I'd love a leopard seal replica. I think that'd be neat.
I think it'd be really cool to have that famous Archaeopteryx fossil replica. Like my local fossil mineral store, they have that Archaeopteryx replica on their wall, and it's not for sale. And I always see it, and I'm always like, I wish I had that.
Yeah.
Also, like a big pliosaur skull. I just think they look like the most monstrous of like all these skulls. All their teeth are all jagged and messed up. But I already have my favorite fossil. I've got like this little trilobite guy that I love. And he's just got so much personality. I love this guy. So that's my favorite little fossil.
Oh, I love it. $4.99 from Nuzzy D. Are birds exhibiting a different type of intelligence? Crows use tools and communicate. Y'all best like and subscribe. So thank you, Nuzzy D. I don't know if they're exhibiting a different type of intelligence. I would argue that if anything is exhibiting theory of mind, including humans, other apes, proboscideans, and cetaceans, crows are too. Corvids and really like parrots and stuff as well are ridiculously intelligent. And what they're doing doesn't seem to be categorically different than what mammals are doing. But what's interesting is that they don't have a neocortex like mammals do. They have convergently evolved a different part of the brain that is basically the bird version of a neocortex, but it's not ancestrally formed. So they didn't inherit the neocortex from a common ancestor, and then mammals and birds both have them. There's a mammalian neocortex, and then there's like a bird neocortex, but only the intelligent ones have them. It's really weird.
Oh, it gets even weirder when we expand the brain anatomy to octopi, because each octopus tentacle has its own brain that's making its own intelligent decisions for each individual arm. So I don't even know what kind of conscious experience of that would be like if all of your limbs are just going automatically and you're not having to move them all with conscious thought. That's really difficult for me to even think about. Crows, I think it's the same type of intelligence. I don't know really what a different type of intelligence would even mean, because the core functions of intelligence are the same for any species. Like, you don't have to be conscious to be intelligent. Intelligence is like a function, and like the function of intelligence would be like pattern recognition and like relevance realization and making predictions for future outcomes. Like, those are the core functions of intelligence. They don't require consciousness, and birds are doing the same kind of intelligent processes as any other animal. So it's the same type of intelligence.
We got $5 from Austin Sims. Oh God, Donnie wants to do a discussion with me about specific ancestry. Would either of you be willing to help me prep so I counter his nonsense effectively. Out here for a sec. Hopefully everybody heard me read all of that, but I see that I'm skipping. So, Grayson, if you can hear me, you go first.
Yeah, so I heard most of that. Yeah, I mean, if you are dead set on doing this discussion, I will help you prep. I think that you have reached out to me before, so I think I have your contact information, Austin. I can help you prep on that, but honestly, I would just recommend not doing it. I think Erika would probably make the same recommendation.
I would. I would. Now, the thing is about Donnie is that I don't practice what I preach with him. So I would love to tell you that, I don't interact with standing for truth at all. And, and I'm strong and powerful, but I fall into the trap every now and again. With his stuff on specific ancestry, like really and truly, here's what I'm going to recommend. This is so like basically watch my video on created kinds. I did like a 2.5 hour long video or 2 hour video on why created kinds do not work, and that is an implicit assumption that has to be made for this separate ancestry thing. On top of that, I have another video on Neanderthals and why Neanderthals can't fit within this idea of like separate ancestry, because if you say that Neanderthals descend from humans, which they definitively don't, but creationists say that they do, then that pushes back their date for mitochondrial leave too much, and they can't have that. And if you say that humans descend from Neanderthals, then you have to say that Adam and Eve were at least that primitive, which they also don't want to do. And if you say that they're sister species, which is the truth, then you also push that divergence date too far into the past. I have not seen Donnie deal with any of that yet, but I would needle him on that. So you send me an email on any
Erika.
questions that you have. I haven't checked my emails in weeks, so I'm behind.
Erika, it's so bad with the Neanderthal thing because they simultaneously say that, yes, Neanderthals descend from Adam and Eve like us, but the reason why their genes are what they are is because they are simultaneously hyper mutants, like meaning that their mutation rate is just exorbitantly high. They're hyper mutating every generation and simultaneously highly inbred, which, if you know your population genetics, you would know those are two opposite forces. One of them increases homogeneity and one of them increases heterogeneity. So they're trying to explain. Yeah.
It's like saying Neanderthals are super wet and super dry. Like you can't,
Yeah.
They're literally opposing forces as far as the mechanisms of evolution go. I talked about that in that video. It doesn't work. $10 from SkepTalk. My question for people who say sex/gender is binary is this: why do androgynous people exist? If sex and gender was a binary, then androgynous people should not exist. But they do. They don't like any kind of variety. You either got to be a He-Man woman hater or like a beautiful femme woman, Aphrodite, and there's no in between. And rarely do the people who say that look like either of those things. $5 from Elias Shauna Silverbow. The other day I found a fossil of a PC. It had about a trilobite of storage. I know you love my jokes, Erika. Thank you for that.
Oh, we do not appreciate your trilobite jokes.
You know who would love that? Forrest would love that, and it speaks to the negatives of his person, of him as a person, that he would enjoy that. So you can tell him I said that. $5 from Larry Fishman. Juicy fruit is jackfruit flavored. It's another huge Asian fruit, but it doesn't smell like death. Oh, embarrassing, Grayson.
No, I will not have this misinformation. I heard that it was durian flavored, and my extremely vague and source-less information that I remember from literally more than 10 years ago cannot be questioned, okay?
He proved it when he made it up. 999 pounds from Frank Reed. Trees aren't men. Waters aren't people. Soylent Green is people. Great show tonight. Thanks to you both. Erika, you're my favorite science communicator. Thank you so much, Frank Reed. I really appreciate that. I try to communicate my science well, but I fail often. Just ask my students. I'm just kidding. I got good reviews, I promise. $5 from Swamp10. I asked a creationist, how did plants survive the flood? He told me because they had seeds and were able to continue. How would you respond? Oh, very simply. I've seen this experiment performed at least twice, and both have been extensively documented, and one of the authors actually reached out to me to tell me about this experiment. If you take one of the most robust plants against salt content, like true salt content, which is usually like a mangrove, and you submerge it for like a year straight, or take it even better, an olive tree, which is what they need for the story. Like there has to be an olive tree that grew almost immediately after the flood, which covered the entire earth, several cubits above the highest mountain, submerging olive trees. And then the bird goes and gets the olive branch. So that's like a necessary thing for the narrative. If you submerge an olive seed or an olive sapling in salt water, it dies after like 2 weeks or something like that. Like they straight up cannot survive 2 weeks, let alone 40 days and 40 nights, let alone 1 full year. So I would point to the experiments that show that cannot happen. And then they would probably say something like olive trees used to be built different, in which case I would say, cool, so you're appealing to a miracle because there's no support for that. And then the conversation would probably veer off into being about abiogenesis or something.
But Erika, go for wood.
Go for wood. Go for wood. $5 from Monkey to Typewriter. Frightened civilians running in black and white, screaming in subtitled Japanese. Oh no, Godzilla Gibbon is destroying the city. We must call Godzilla. It would be very similar to that. My power, by the way, if I were a kaiju that were an enormous gibbon, or even just myself, would be like a super high-pitched sonic scream. Like that would be, it would be an acoustic related power, both because gibbons make high-pitched noises and because I myself have a very high-pitched voice. It's very thematic.
Godzilla Gibbon.
Godzilla Gibbon. Gibzilla.
No,
$5 from Monkey at a typewriter. Ooh, been meaning to ask you this, Erika. What is the best gibbon? Particularly, what is the best extant gibbon, and why are Siamangs for basic bitches? I totally agree. People who say Siamangs are their favorite, cough cough, my husband, they love Siamangs, and rightfully so, but it's kind of like a vanilla choice, right? Because it's like they are really good. That's true. No one's denying this. They're great. But I myself have a bit more of a refined palate. So for me, I like Claus's gibbon, or Hylobates clausi. And part of the reason why I like them is because they're one of the few gibbons in my data set that aren't just monomorphic in the size of their canine teeth, but they're actually biased towards females by about 12%, which is pretty unique. It's the only ape that has that condition where the females like consistently have like significantly larger canines instead of them being monomorphic or biased in favor of the males. And I also like Claus's gibbons because they have cute hair for the same reason that I enjoy Siamangs. I also love silvery gibbons. I think silvery gibbons are really beautiful. And
Erika, what are the gibbons that have the white cheeks?
White-cheeked gibbons.
Oh, well, that's obvious. Okay, I was about to say, I really like those ones. I've seen them. I didn't know what they were called, okay? But
they're beautiful. I also love those. And white-cheeked gibbons, actually members of Nomascus, are sexually dichromatic. So the males will be that black color with the white cheeks, and then the females will be a buff color or like a tan color, and then they've got this weird black patch that's like a toupee right on the top of their head. They're awesome.
Whoa, you're getting me going. Oh, whoa.
They're really great. I really love them. They're awesome. I could talk about that kind of stuff all day. $9.99 from Greeny. I was sad when I saw you left Twitter, Gutsy Gibbon. I don't blame you, but I think I'm going to delete it too. Are you on anything else? I'm on Blue Sky, and I tweet semi-regularly on Blue Sky. Gutsy Gibbon, all lowercase, all one word, .bluesky.social. Follow me over there. A bunch of, I will say this. I don't know if Blue Sky will be the next Twitter, but it is absolutely the next space for scientists. Every single scientist and science communicator that I know and love, every single one of them is on Blue Sky and is regularly posting, including like the best of all, Chris Stringer, who I get all of my scientific articles from because he's like plugged in to the release system, and he's just immediately like linking all of them with his little thoughts. I think it's great. So he's not a science communicator; he's a paleoanthropologist, but everybody's there is what I'm saying. Chris Stringer is like an old British man, and he is on Blue Sky, so you should get on Blue Sky.
Even I am on Blue Sky, and I was like never even on Twitter, basically. Yeah.
Even Grayson is on Blue. Even Hank Green is on Blue Sky. The main guy on Blue Sky. Okie dokie. $4.99 from Poor Claire. Erika, you should drop the full album. Grayson, we are dying to know which apologists are hitting you up.
I cannot out him like that. I can't do him like that. Do you know what these hashtags are?
Anything. I'm not saying. I do know these hashtags, but they're not coming to me right now. Someone's going to say them in chat, and it's going to make me
Go
look
Jimmy
really
yourself,
embarrassing.
Jimmy. And
Go Jimmy yourself, Jimmy. That's right. I was like,
And
I
don't
know it has something
apologize
to
to
do with the
him.
go fuck yourself, Jimmy, but I couldn't remember. And then Jimmy
Gotcha.
got substituted in for go fuck yourself because it was go Jimmy yourself. I remember now. Thank you for
Yeah,
telling
okay.
me.
and the other one is don't apologize to him.
Yeah, don't apologize to him. That's right. That's the chewed gum slogan. That's awesome. I still do need to read the schedule, by the way. $4.99 from Bridge the Divide. According to Wrigley's, juicy fruit is a combination of artificial pineapple, banana, lemon, and orange. The ripe jackfruit similarity is not intended. Grayson,
Well, okay,
the person who debunked you was debunked.
Okay, I will officially recognize the
never
last
recover.
sentence, but I am ignoring that first sentence. Okay, so
You won't recover.
we will debunk that last guy. Jackfruits are out. We are durian supremacy real hours right here. So everyone can plug their nose and worship the king of fruits.
I don't know. Debates Ken Hovind more than once, enjoys durian. There's a pattern here, Grayson. I'm concerned. Folks, before we continue, before we sign off here, I guess I should say, I got to read you the schedule. I got to let you know what's coming up so that you don't miss anything ever. Coming up next, after today, which is the 16th, tomorrow we've got Chewed Gum with Alyssa and Eve. Then we got the Hang Up on the 18th. That's Thursday with Matt Dillahunty and Arden. And then we got the Transatlantic Con Show with Arden and Luxander. And then all the way on the 15th, on the Sunday show, we've got Forrest Valkai and John Gleason in the morning. And then in the evening, looks like Forrest is doing like an all-day show.
No.
Wait, did I mess that up? Opposite.
Yeah, the 15th's passed. You're looking at the 22nd?
Rip. Okay, the 22nd is Forrest and Eve, not Forrest and John. Just kidding. Forrest is doing double on the Sunday show. Jeez, he's a beast. And then we also have Matt that evening for the Sunday show after dark. Folks, thank you so much for being here after I just almost knocked my phone and this little piece of silicone that I've been playing with off the desk. Thanks for being here with us on SkepTalk this evening. We've had an absolute blast. Really enjoyed the calls. We had plenty of folks hanging out in the chat, making good jokes, making bad jokes, taking my side on things, which is, of course, the imperative. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode of SkepTalk. We're going to see you next time. But until then, I want to thank you for being a curious primate. And please take care of yourselves. Anything, Grayson?
No, subscribe to the line. Come on, let's go.
I should have said that. And then the ending is here and you do a little dance. I'm doing a little